a broken house key. That's all the boy carried when he walked through the rain and into a room full of outlaws. 11 years old, soaked, silent, and behind his eyes, something worse than fear, something that looked like surrender. The Black Vulture's MC had seen combat veterans break down in that same garage. They'd watched grown men crumble under the weight of things they couldn't name, but none of them were prepared for the quiet devastation of a child who had already stopped expecting anyone to open a door for him. What happened next inside that clubhouse didn't just change Samuel Vance's life, it forced every man wearing a leather cut to confront the wreckage they'd been running from for years. Stay with this one all the way to the end. Hit that like button right now, drop a comment, and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. And trust me, you are not ready for where this story goes. The rain had been falling for 6 hours by the time the boy appeared. Not the kind of rain that washes things clean. The kind that punishes. November rain in Calvary Falls, Illinois, a town that had already been dying before the last factory sealed its gates, fell like something personal. It hammered the cracked asphalt of Depot Street, turned the drainage ditches into brown rivers, and drove every living thing indoors except the stray dogs and the forgotten. Samuel Vance was 11 years old. He stood at the edge of the Black Vulture's MC parking lot in a gray hoodie 3 sizes too large, the hood plastered to his skull, his sneakers so soaked they made a sound like wet paper with every step. In his right hand he held a house key that no longer worked. He'd tried it 9 times before walking away from the front door of 412 Ridgeline Court. 9 times. Each turn of the key a little slower than the last, as if giving the lock one more chance to recognize him. It didn't. The garage bay of the Black Vulture's clubhouse sat at the end of a gravel service road behind the old Calvary Falls rail depot. 3 overhead doors, 2 of them open, spilling fluorescent light and the growl of classic rock into the rain-soaked dark. The smell hit first. Gasoline, chain lube, burnt coffee, and the faint industrial sweetness of Bondo drying under heat lamps. 4 motorcycles in various stages of surgery lined the concrete floor. A transmission housing sat on a steel workbench like a mechanical heart waiting for a body. Rhett Mercer was elbow-deep in a 1987 shovelhead when he heard the footsteps. Not boots, not the heavy, confident stride of a brother coming in from a run. Something lighter, uncertain. The sound of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to be walking in this direction. Rhett straightened up slowly. He was 44 years old, built like a man who had once carried 80 pounds of gear through mountains he'd never talk about, with hands permanently stained the color of engine oil and a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Broken nose, a scar through his left eyebrow, jaw set at an angle that suggested it had been reset more than once. His cut bore the Black Vulture's bottom rocker and the patch of a road captain, but the tattoo visible on his forearm, the one most people noticed, was a medical corps insignia from a war that had ended 15 years ago and hadn't stopped playing in his head since. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked toward the open bay door. The boy stood just inside the threshold, not stepping forward, not stepping back. Balanced on that invisible line between the darkness behind him and the light ahead, as if the decision of which direction to move carried more weight than an 11-year-old should ever have to carry. Water dripped from the hem of his hoodie onto the concrete. His hands hung at his sides, and in the right one, the key caught the fluorescent light and gleamed like something worthless trying to be noticed. Rhett didn't move, didn't call out. He'd spent enough years around damaged things, engines, men, memories, to know that the wrong word at the wrong moment could make something fragile shut down permanently. "Locks got changed," Samuel said. His voice was flat, not emotional, not pleading, just factual, the way a kid speaks when crying stopped working a long time ago and the only thing left is information. The garage fell quiet. Dex Halloran, the club's sergeant-at-arms, looked up from the tire he was mounting. 41, shaved head, a neck tattoo that crawled up behind his ear like something trying to escape. He'd done 2 tours in Fallujah and come back with a hearing loss in his left ear and a flinch he couldn't always control. His hand stopped moving on the tire iron. Across the shop, Boone Skaggs set down a socket wrench without a sound. Boone was the oldest patch holder in the chapter, 56, gray beard, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a voice like gravel being dragged across sheet metal. He'd buried a son. Everyone in the club knew it. Nobody ever brought it up. and in the back corner, barely visible behind a parched shelf, a prospect named Eddie Culp paused mid-sweep and watched. 4 men, 1 boy, a broken key, and the rain filling every silence. Rhett walked toward the threshold. Not fast, not slow. The way you approach a dog that's been hit, steady, low, no sudden movements. "How long you been outside?" he asked. Samuel looked at him. The boy's eyes were brown, too large for his face, and carried something Rhett recognized instantly. Not because he'd studied it, but because he'd lived it. The flat, practiced calm of someone who had learned to survive by becoming invisible, by making themselves small enough that the thing hunting them might look right past. "A while," Samuel said. Rhett nodded. He didn't ask why the locks were changed. He didn't ask where the boy's mother was. He didn't ask any of the questions that would have been reasonable and correct and completely useless in this moment. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the interior of the shop. "We got dry towels in the back. Coffee's old, but it's hot. And Boone made chili around 5 that nobody's brave enough to finish." The corner of Samuel's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something smaller, something closer to relief. He stepped inside. The warmth hit him like a wall. Not just temperature, though the shop heaters were running and the concrete radiated the stored heat of engines that had been idling all day. It was something else. The smell of food, the low murmur of men working, the clank of tools, the sense that this space had a rhythm, a purpose, and that no one inside it was afraid. Samuel stood on the concrete, dripping, and for a moment he looked like what he was, a child who had been standing in the rain for a very long time, waiting for permission to come inside. Dex brought a shop towel, the heavy blue industrial kind, and set it on the workbench next to the boy without saying a word. Boone appeared a minute later with a bowl of chili, a plastic spoon, and a can of root beer, which he placed on the bench with the same quiet precision he used to torque a cylinder head. "Sit anywhere that ain't an engine," Boone said. Samuel ate. He ate the way hungry children eat when they're trying not to look hungry. Controlled bites, the spoon never scraping the bowl, eyes scanning the room between each mouthful as if cataloging exits and threats. Rhett watched from across the shop, pretending to work on the shovel head, and felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He knew that posture. He knew that silence. He knew the architecture of a kid who had built walls so carefully that the walls themselves had become invisible, and the child behind them had almost disappeared. After the chili was gone, Samuel set the spoon down and looked at the motorcycle on Rhett's bench. "What year is that?" Rhett glanced at the bike. 87 Shovelhead. Last year they made them before switching to the Evolution engine. This one's been sitting in a barn since '94. Cylinder walls are scored, timing chains stretched, and somebody put the wrong jets in the carburetor about 20 years ago. Samuel stared at the engine like it was a puzzle. "Can you fix it?" "Depends on what you mean by fix," Rhett said. "I can make it run. Making it right, that takes longer." The boy nodded slowly, and Rhett had the uncomfortable feeling that Samuel wasn't talking about the motorcycle anymore. Outside, the storm intensified. Thunder rolled across the flatlands south of town, and the rain shifted from vertical to diagonal, sheeting across the parking lot in waves that made the sodium lights blur into orange smears. Nobody suggested calling anyone. Nobody mentioned the time. The unspoken agreement moved through the room like a current. The boy was staying. Dex pulled a folding cot from the storage closet and set it up in the corner behind the parts counter, the same spot where brothers crashed after long rides when they were too wrecked to make it home. He threw a sleeping bag on it, Army surplus olive drab, still carrying the faint chemical smell of waterproofing compound. "It ain't the Hilton," Dex said. Samuel looked at the cot, then at Dex, then at the sleeping bag. "It's dry," he said. Dex's jaw tightened. He turned away before the boy could see what moved across his face. The garage settled into its nighttime rhythm. Boone cleaned the coffee maker with the same meticulous attention he gave to valve adjustments. Rhett continued working on the shovel head, his hands moving with the automatic precision of someone whose body knew the work even when his mind was somewhere else entirely. The prospect, Eddie, finished sweeping and retreated to the supply room, glancing back at the boy twice before disappearing. And Samuel lay on the cot with his eyes open, watching the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the garage the way a castaway might listen to the first human voices after years alone. He didn't sleep for a long time. Neither did Rhett. Around midnight, when the shop had gone mostly quiet except for the rain and the tick of cooling engines, Rhett sat down at the workbench closest to the cot and started disassembling a carburetor. Not because it needed it, because his hands needed something to do while his mind worked through the geometry of what was happening. A kid with a broken key, changed locks, November rain, no phone call to a parent, no mention of where he was supposed to be. Rhett had seen the address on the boy's school ID when Samuel had taken off the hoodie, 412 Ridgeline Court. He knew the street, knew the kind of houses on it. Small ranch homes built in the 70s, the kind with aluminum siding that turned gray in the weather and driveways that cracked every winter. Working-class houses that had been modest when they were new and had become something worse since the plant closed. He also knew, from the way Samuel had said locks got changed, with the emphasis on again, that this was not the first time. "You ever take apart a carburetor?" Rhett asked, not looking up. Samuel rolled onto his side on the cot. His eyes found the parts laid out on the bench: float bowl, needle valve, jets, gaskets, the main body sitting like a small cathedral of precision. "No." "Come here." The boy got up, wrapped the sleeping bag around his shoulders like a cape, and walked to the bench in his socks. He stood close enough to see, but far enough to run. Rhett pointed to the disassembled carburetor. "This is the throat. Air comes in here. Fuel gets pulled through these jets by vacuum pressure. The ratio has to be exact. Too rich, the engine floods. Too lean, it starves. The whole thing runs on balance." Samuel studied the pieces. His fingers hovered over the float valve. "Can I touch it?" "Wouldn't have brought you over here if you couldn't." Samuel picked up the float, turned it in his hands, felt the weight, the smoothness, the mechanical certainty of an object designed to do one thing perfectly. "What happens if this breaks?" he asked. "Fuel keeps flowing. Engine drowns." "Well, what if you don't have a replacement?" Rhett looked at the boy for the first time in several minutes. "Then you fabricate one. You find something close. You make it work with what you've got." Samuel set the float down carefully. His hands, Rhett noticed, were steady, steadier than they should have been for a kid his age. "My stepfather says I break everything I touch," Samuel said. He said it without emotion, the way you'd report a weather forecast. Matter of fact. Memorized. Rhett's hand stopped moving. Across the shop, Dex, who had been lying on the couch in the common area with his eyes closed, opened them. Boone, in the doorway of the kitchen, set his coffee mug down on the counter so slowly it didn't make a sound. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Long enough for the rain outside to fill the entire room with its noise. "Your stepfather's wrong," Rhett said. He didn't say it with warmth. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with the absolute, unshakable finality of a man stating a mechanical fact. The same way he'd say, "The sky is up," or "This bolt is 3/4 inch." Samuel looked at him, searched his face for the lie, for the performance, for the moment the kindness would reveal itself as something with conditions attached. He didn't find it. "You want to learn how to put this back together?" Rhett asked. Samuel nodded. They worked until almost 2 in the morning. Rhett walked him through each step, cleaning the jets with carburetor cleaner and compressed air, inspecting the needle valve seat for wear, checking the float height with a steel ruler, reassembling the entire unit in reverse order. Samuel's hands moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence, fitting each piece into its place with a focus that bordered on reverence. When the last screw was tightened and the carburetor sat reassembled on the bench, Samuel stared at it for a long time. "I built that," he said quietly. "You rebuilt it," Rhett corrected. "There's a difference. Building's easy. Rebuilding takes more." After the boy finally fell asleep on the cot, his breathing slow and even for the first time all night, Rhett stepped outside under the awning and called a number he hadn't dialed in over a year. Avery Cole answered on the 3rd ring. "It's Mercer," Rhett said. A pause. The sound of sheets rustling, a lamp clicking on. "It's midnight, Rhett." "I know what time it is. I've got a kid in my shop. 11 years old, walked in out of the rain 3 hours ago. Locks changed at home. No parent looking for him. No phone call. He told me his stepfather says he breaks everything he touches. Silence on the other end, but not the silence of someone ignoring him. The silence of someone who had heard this kind of report too many times and still felt the weight of every single one. Name? Avery asked. Samuel Vance, 412 Ridgeline Court. I know that address. Her voice changed, hardened. I flagged that household 8 months ago. CPS closed the case after one visit. Mother cooperative, stepfather cooperative, child presented as well-adjusted. Their word, not mine. Rhett leaned against the metal siding of the building. The rain was lighter now, barely more than mist, but the cold had deepened into something that felt permanent. He's not well-adjusted, Avery. He's a kid who's figured out that if he doesn't make noise, nobody hits him. That's not adjustment. That's survival training. I know what it is, she said quietly. Can you keep him through tomorrow? He's not going anywhere. I'll be there by 8. And Rhett? Yeah. Document everything, every word he says. Write it down. Don't trust your memory. Courts want paper. The line went dead. Rhett stood under the awning and smoked a cigarette. He told himself he'd quit 6 months ago. The parking lot gleamed black and wet under the sodium lights. 3 Harleys sat under canvas covers near the fence, their shapes in the dark like sleeping animals. Beyond the lot, Depot Street ran straight into the center of town, past the shuttered hardware store, the pawn shop with the barred windows, and the diner that closed at 6 because there wasn't enough business to justify the electricity. Calvary Falls, a town that had been failing its own people for 20 years, and now a boy was sleeping on a cot in a biker garage because every institution designed to protect him had checked a box and moved on. Rhett crushed the cigarette under his boot. Inside, he found a yellow legal pad in the office drawer and sat down at the desk under the buzzing fluorescent light. He wrote for 40 minutes. Everything Samuel had said. The broken key. The changed locks. The word again. The comment about the stepfather. The way the boy ate. The way he watched exits. The way his hand stayed steady when his voice should have cracked. He dated the page, signed it, and locked it in the desk. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but the sky hadn't cleared. A gray ceiling of clouds sat over Calvary Falls like a lid, low enough to feel like pressure on the skull. The temperature had dropped into the 30s overnight, and the puddles in the parking lot wore thin crusts of ice that shattered under boot heels. Samuel woke to the sound of a coffee grinder. He sat up on the cot, disoriented for a moment, the sleeping bag pooled around his waist. The garage was bright. The overhead doors were closed against the cold, and the space heaters hummed from 3 different corners. Boone was in the kitchen area making coffee with the kind of ritual concentration that suggested the process was the point, not the product. Morning, Boone said without turning around. There's eggs if you want 'em, scrambled. Don't ask for over easy because I can't do it and I'm too old to learn. Samuel got up, folded the sleeping bag, made the cot, tucked the corners the way someone had taught him, or the way he'd taught himself, which was the same thing when no one was paying attention. He ate the eggs standing at the workbench, watching Rhett and Dex through the office window. They were talking. Dex's arms were crossed. Rhett was holding the yellow legal pad. The conversation was too quiet to hear, but the body language told Samuel everything he needed to know. They were talking about him. He finished the eggs, washed the plate in the shop sink, dried it, put it back exactly where it came from. Then he stood in the middle of the garage with his hands in his pockets and waited. This was the part he knew, the part where the adults decided, the part where the conversation behind closed doors produced a verdict. Stay, go. Someone else's problem. And the kid had no vote. At 8:15, a dark blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Avery Cole stepped out carrying a leather messenger bag and a travel mug of coffee. She was 38, tall, with short-cropped hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she'd spent years sitting across from people who lied to her, and she'd gotten very good at waiting them out. She wore no jewelry except a watch with a cracked crystal that she never replaced because it still kept time. Rhett met her at the bay door. He's inside, he said. Ate breakfast, cleaned up after himself. Hasn't asked a single question about what happens next. Avery's eyes moved past him to the boy standing alone in the middle of the garage. That's because he already knows, she said. In his experience, what happens next is never good. She walked inside. Didn't rush. Didn't kneel to his level, or use a soft voice, or do any of the things that training manuals recommend and traumatized kids see through instantly. She walked up to Samuel, set her bag on the workbench, and looked at him the way one adult looks at another when respect is the default, not something that needs to be performed. "My name is Avery. I work with kids who got dealt a bad hand. Rhett called me because he thinks you might be one of them. Are you?" Samuel looked at her for a long time. His eyes moved to the messenger bag, to the cracked watch, to the coffee mug, small details, the inventory of someone who had learned to read rooms before rooms read him. "Depends on what you mean by bad," he said. Avery almost smiled. Almost. "Fair answer," she said. "Here's what I know so far. You walked into this garage last night because you couldn't get into your own house. That's happened before. You slept here because you had nowhere else to go. And this morning you cleaned up after yourself because you've learned that if you don't make a mess, people are less likely to send you away." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to make you talk," Avery continued. "And I'm not here to make promises I can't keep. But I need to know one thing, and I need the truth. Where do you sleep when the locks get changed and you don't come here?" The garage was silent. The coffee maker dripped. A wrench clinked softly on a distant bench where Dex was pretending to work. Samuel looked at the floor. "The park," he said. "Behind the baseball dugout, there's a bench that's got an overhang." Rhett closed his eyes. Boone turned around and walked into the storage room. The door closed behind him with a click that echoed louder than it should have. Avery's hand tightened around her coffee mug. She held the grip for 3 seconds, then released it. "Okay," she said. Her voice was level, professional, but her eyes were not. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make some calls. There are people whose job it is to make sure no kid sleeps in a park. It takes a little time, but I'm going to move fast. While I do that, you're going to stay here with Rhett. Is that okay with you?" Samuel glanced at Rhett. Rhett gave a single nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing performative, just the quiet affirmation of a man who had already decided. "Yeah," Samuel said. "That's okay." Avery spent the next 2 hours on the phone outside the garage, pacing the parking lot in the cold with her coffee going cold in her hand. Through the window, Samuel could see her talking, pausing, talking again. Occasionally she'd stop walking and stand very still, which he somehow knew meant whoever was on the other end was saying something she didn't want to hear. Rhett put him to work. Not busy work, real work. They pulled the carburetor off the shovel head and mounted it on the intake manifold. Rhett showed him how to route the fuel line, how to check for vacuum leaks with starter fluid, how to read the spark plugs for mixture. Samuel listened with the kind of intensity that most adults mistook for obedience, but was actually something else entirely, the desperate focus of a child who had discovered that learning something real was the only power available to him. "You're good with your hands," Rhett said. Samuel didn't answer, but his fingers moved more confidently on the next connection. At 10:40, Avery came back inside. Her face told a story before her mouth did. "I've got a placement," she said. "Emergency foster. A couple named Grant and Evelyn Porter. They live about 12 miles outside of town. Quiet property. He's a retired shop teacher. She volunteers at the county library. They've fostered before. They know what they're doing, and more importantly, they know what not to do." Samuel stood very still. "When?" he asked. "This afternoon. I'll drive you." The boy looked around the garage, at the shovel head, at the tools on the bench, at the carburetor he'd rebuilt with his own hands, at Boone's coffee mug, at Dex's gloves draped over a handlebar, at the sleeping bag folded neatly on the cot. His face did not change, but his hands, for the first time since he'd walked into the garage, trembled. Rhett saw it. He walked over, crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level, not quite kneeling, not quite standing, somewhere in between, and he said the only thing that mattered. "This door stays open, you hear me? Every Saturday, any time. You don't need a key, you don't need an invitation, and you don't need to explain why you're here. The door stays open." Samuel's lips pressed together, his chin dipped half an inch. His eyes stayed dry, but something behind them, something that had been locked so tightly for so long that it had almost fossilized, cracked. He nodded. At 2:15 that afternoon, Avery pulled the sedan out of the parking lot with Samuel in the back seat. Rhett stood in the open bay door, arms crossed, watching until the taillights disappeared around the bend on Depot Street. Dex appeared beside him. "You good?" Dex asked. "No," Rhett said. He turned and walked back inside. 3 weeks passed. Samuel arrived at the garage every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Not 9:05. Not 8:55. 9 o'clock, as if punctuality was the only currency he trusted. He came on a bicycle the porters had given him, an old mountain bike, blue and silver, with a basket zip-tied to the handlebars that usually held a water bottle and a notebook. The notebook was where he sketched engine diagrams. Rhett had given him a shop manual for the Shovelhead, a thick, grease-stained climber manual with dog-eared pages and margin notes from 3 previous owners. Samuel read it the way other kids read adventure novels. He memorized torque specs. He learned the difference between a flathead and a Phillips, and why the wrong one could strip a screw and ruin your afternoon. He asked questions that most adults wouldn't think to ask. Why do they call it a suicide clutch? Because if your foot slips off the pedal in traffic, you're done. It's a design that requires commitment. So it's not actually about wanting to die. It's about having to pay attention. Rhett looked at the boy. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it is." The porters were good. Samuel told Rhett this in small, cautious installments, never volunteering information, but not hiding it either. Grant showed him how to use a table saw. Evelyn kept the pantry stocked with peanut butter and didn't ask questions when he took extra to his room. They gave him a bedroom with a door that locked from the inside, and when he tested the lock the first night, 4 times, neither of them mentioned it. But there were things Samuel didn't say, things Rhett noticed in the spaces between words. The way Samuel flinched when a tool dropped, the way he positioned himself near exits, the way he never turned his back on a doorway, the way he ate, quickly, efficiently, as if the food might be taken away, and the fact that he never, not once, mentioned his mother. On the 4th Saturday, Rhett was showing Samuel how to time an ignition when the prospect, Eddie Culp, walked through the bay door with a sneer that had been building for weeks. Eddie was 23, wiry, with a patchy beard, and the kind of restless energy that made older men tired just watching. He'd been prospecting for 6 months, and had spent most of that time confusing arrogance with confidence. He looked at Samuel on the shop stool, looked at the climber manual open on the bench, and said the words loud enough for the entire garage to hear. "So what, we're running a daycare now? Kid's a charity case, Mercer. You want to play daddy, adopt one. Don't bring strays into the shop." The garage didn't just go quiet. It went cold. Boone set down his wrench. Dex stood up from the couch. 2 other patch holders, Trix Maynard and a road-worn veteran named Colt Bishop, stopped what they were doing and turned toward Eddie with the synchronized attention of men who had been in rooms where those kinds of words had consequences. Samuel sat perfectly still on the stool, his face emptied. The expression Rhett recognized, the one that meant the walls were going up, the shutters were closing, and the child inside was retreating to a place where words couldn't follow. Rhett put down the timing light. He walked toward Eddie. Not fast, not slow. The same measured pace he'd used when he walked toward the boy in the rain, but the energy was different now. The air around him tightened. His shoulders dropped half an inch into a stance that anyone with combat training would recognize as the last position before violence. He stopped 18 inches from Eddie's face. "You say one more word," Rhett said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and you're not going to lose your prospect patch. You're going to lose the privilege of standing in this building. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Eddie's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted to the other men in the room, found nothing, no allies, no sympathy, no exit. "He's got more right to be in this garage than you've earned in 6 months, Rhett continued, because he shows up, he listens, he works, and he has never once made another person in this room feel like they don't belong." The silence stretched. Eddie swallowed, looked at the floor, took 1 step backward. "Sorry," he muttered. "Not to me," Rhett said. Eddie looked at Samuel. The boy stared back at him with those 2 large brown eyes, and whatever Eddie saw in them made his jaw clench and his gaze drop. "Sorry, kid," Eddie said. Then he turned and walked out of the garage and didn't come back for 3 days. Samuel sat on the stool. His hands gripped the edge of the bench. His knuckles were white. Rhett returned to his position beside the shovel head, picked up the timing light, adjusted the distributor by 2 degrees. "Where were we?" he said. Samuel exhaled, a long, shaking breath that carried more weight than any 11-year-old should know how to hold. "Timing," he said. "Right, timing." That night, after Samuel had ridden back to the Porters, Rhett sat in the office alone. The yellow legal pad was on the desk. He'd added pages since that first night, dates, observations, things Samuel said, things Samuel didn't say, the kind of record that Avery had asked for and that Rhett now maintained with the same discipline he'd once applied to mission reports. He was writing when his phone rang, Avery's name on the screen. He picked up. "We have a problem," she said. Rhett stopped writing. The mother filed a petition to get Samuel back. She's claiming she completed a rehabilitation program and that the home environment has been stabilized. The stepfather is listed as a co-petitioner. Rhett's grip on the pen tightened until his knuckles went white. "The stepfather," he repeated. "His name is Dale Pittman. He's a long-haul trucker. Clean record. No priors, no complaints on file. On paper, he looks like a model citizen." "On paper." "I know, Rhett, but the court doesn't run on what we know. It runs on what we can prove. And right now we can't prove anything about Dale Pittman except that he pays his taxes and drives a truck." Rhett stood up, walked to the window. The parking lot was empty. The sodium lights hummed their lonely orange frequency into the dark. "When's the hearing?" he asked. 3 weeks. And Rhett, there's something else. He waited. "The judge assigned to the case is Raymond Keach. He's been on the family bench for 19 years. And in those 19 years, he has never once ruled against a biological parent's petition for reunification. Not once." The phone felt heavy in his hand. The pen sat abandoned on the yellow pad. Outside, the wind pushed a paper cup across the parking lot with a scraping sound that went on and on. "So we've got a kid who sleeps in parks," Rhett said slowly, "a stepfather nobody can touch, a mother who checked the right boxes, and a judge who's never said no to sending a child back." "Yes," Avery said, "that's exactly what we've got." Rhett stared through the window at the dark. Somewhere in that darkness, 12 miles down a county road, an 11-year-old boy was sleeping in a room with a lock on the inside of the door, a lock he tested 4 times every night, believing, maybe for the first time, that the walls around him might hold. And in 3 weeks, a man in a black robe was going to decide whether to tear those walls down. The hearing was scheduled for December 14th, 17 days away. And in those 17 days, the world around Samuel Vance began to close like a fist. Rhett found out about the lawyer on a Tuesday. He was underneath the shovel head, draining oil into a catch pan, when Avery's name lit up his phone screen for the 3rd time that morning. He slid out from under the bike, wiped his hands, and answered with the phone pressed between his ear and his shoulder. "Talk." "Dale Pittman hired a family attorney. Name's Glenn Harwick. He's out of Springfield." Rhett sat up on the creeper. "Never heard of him?" "You wouldn't. He doesn't do criminal. He does custody. Specifically, he does reunification cases for parents who've had children removed. His win rate in the last 4 years is 87%. The oil dripped into the pan, slow, steady. The sound filled the silence between them. 87, Rhett repeated. His strategy is always the same. He builds a narrative around parental redemption. The mother completes a program, the stepfather cooperates fully, the home is inspected and passes. He presents the family as reformed, and the court, which is already biased toward biological reunification, gives him exactly what he wants. It works because nobody fights back hard enough. Rhett stood up. His knees ached from the cold concrete, the kind of ache that had started in a forward operating base 11 years ago and never fully left. "Then we fight back harder," he said. "With what, Rhett?" "The boy's statements are powerful, but they're not evidence of abuse. Sleeping in a park is neglect, but Pittman will argue he didn't know. Changed locks can be explained as a security measure after a break-in. I've seen this playbook 100 times. He told me his stepfather said he breaks everything he touches." A verbal statement from an 11-year-old to a non-custodial adult with no professional credentials. Harwick will shred it in 10 seconds. Rhett walked to the bay door and looked out at the parking lot. The sky was the color of dirty concrete. A wind was coming from the north, carrying the smell of frozen farmland and something metallic. Snow, maybe, still hours away, but already announcing itself. So what do we do? Avery paused. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Lower, careful. The voice of someone about to say something they'd been thinking about for a while. I need you to do something you're not going to like. I already don't like any of this. I need you to stay away from the hearing. The words landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. Explain. If you show up, a biker, with a cut, with a club affiliation, Harwick will use you. He'll frame the narrative. He'll say the boy has been spending unsupervised time with an outlaw motorcycle club. He'll say the porters allowed it. He'll say the system failed to protect Samuel from dangerous influences. And the safest place for him is back with his biological mother and her husband. He will make you the threat, Rhett, and the judge will believe him. Rhett's hand found the door frame. His knuckles whitened against the metal. I'm not the threat. I know that. You know that. Samuel knows that. But a courtroom is not a garage. It doesn't run on what's true. It runs on what looks true. He didn't answer. Rhett, I heard you. Will you stay away? The silence lasted long enough for Avery to understand that his answer was not a promise. It was a pause. And pauses, with men like Rhett Mercer, were the most dangerous kind of response. I'll think about it, he said, and hung up. That Saturday, Samuel arrived at 9 as always. Blue and silver mountain bike. Water bottle and notebook in the basket. Jacket zipped to the throat, cheeks raw from the cold. He walked into the garage and went straight to the shovel head like a surgeon reporting for duty. Rhett watched him from the office doorway. The boy moved differently now. Not the terrified stillness of 4 weeks ago. Something had shifted. A quarter turn of the dial, barely perceptible, like the first degree of ignition advance. He still checked exits. He still flinched at dropped tools. But his hands reached for things instead of retreating from them. His eyes settled on faces instead of scanning past them. He was rebuilding. Slowly. One bolt at a time. And in 12 days, someone was going to try to take that apart. Rhett walked over. How's the Porter place? Good. Samuel didn't look up from the valve cover he was cleaning. Grant still showing you the shop? We made a birdhouse last week. Dovetail joints. He said mine were better than his first ones. Were they? Probably not. But it was a nice thing to say. Rhett leaned against the bench, crossed his arms. The question he needed to ask sat in his throat like a bone. You know there's a court date coming up. Samuel's hands stopped. He didn't look up, didn't move. But the stillness that overtook him was not the stillness of calm. It was the stillness of prey. The absolute cessation of movement that precedes either flight or surrender. Avery told me, Samuel said. What did she tell you? That my mom wants me back. And? And that Dale signed the papers too. Rhett waited. Let the silence do the work. The boy would either fill it or he wouldn't, and pushing would only build walls. Samuel set the valve cover down on the bench. His fingers lingered on the metal as if the cold surface was the only thing keeping him anchored. He won't change, Samuel said quietly. People think he will because he's good at talking. He talks to the social worker like she's his friend. He talks to the neighbors like everything's fine. He talks to my mom like he loves her. But when everybody goes home and the doors are closed and the truck's in the driveway and the TV's on, he stopped. Rhett didn't breathe. He doesn't have to hit you to hurt you, Samuel said. He knows that. He figured it out a long time ago. You can make a kid disappear without ever touching him. You just stop seeing him. You change the locks. You forget to buy food. You tell him he ruins everything, and then you wait for him to believe it. And when someone finally asks if everything's okay, you smile and say, yeah, he's just a quiet kid. The boy's voice hadn't cracked, hadn't wavered. It came out in a flat, steady stream, like testimony rehearsed so many times it had lost its edges. And that was the worst part. Not the words themselves, but the mechanical precision of their delivery. This was a child who had already tried to tell someone, maybe more than once, and who had learned that telling, by itself, changed nothing. Rhett's jaw worked silently. His hands gripped his own forearms hard enough to leave marks. Behind him, Dex stood in the kitchen doorway. He'd heard everything. His face was a mask, but his eyes were wet. Boone was at his bench, his back turned, both hands flat on the steel surface, pressing down as if trying to keep the bench, or himself, from moving. "You're not going back," Rhett said. Samuel looked at him. "You don't know that." "I'm telling you. Grown-ups say things like that. Then a judge talks for 5 minutes and everything changes." The boy picked up the valve cover and went back to cleaning it. Rhett stood there for a long time, watching the small hands work, and felt something inside him that he hadn't felt since the night his convoy hit an IED outside a village whose name he'd spent a decade trying to forget. The absolute nauseating certainty that something terrible was coming and that being ready for it might not be enough. That evening, after Samuel left, the clubhouse filled with the low rumble of brothers arriving for church. Not the formal kind, the club kind. The weekly meeting where business was discussed, votes were taken, and the internal machinery of the Black Vulture's MC ground forward. 12 men sat around the scarred oak table in the back room. Leather cuts over flannel and denim, coffee mugs and ashtrays. The room smelled like cigarette smoke, engine grease, and the particular musk of men who spent more time outdoors than in. Drake Vossler, the chapter president, sat at the head. 51 years old, silver beard trimmed short, a voice that carried without volume, the way thunder carries before the lightning shows itself. He'd founded the Calvary Falls chapter 23 years ago in a rented warehouse with 4 bikes and a handshake, and he ran it the same way he'd run his platoon in the Gulf, with discipline, loyalty, and an absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. "Rhett," Drake said, "you want to tell the table what's happening, or you want me to guess?" Rhett looked around the room. These men. Scarred hands and bad knees and nightmares they medicated with whiskey and highway wind. Men who had come home from wars and found that home had forgotten them. Men who had built families out of engine parts and road miles because the families they were born into had either failed them or been failed by something larger. "The boy," Rhett said. "Samuel. His mother's petitioning the court for reunification. Hearings in 12 days, the stepfather's on the paperwork. The judge has never denied a reunification petition, ever." The room absorbed it. Trix Maynard, 38, lean as a whip, a mechanic who could hear a misfire from 50 yards, leaned back in his chair. "What's the play?" "There is no play," Rhett said. "Avery's fighting it through legal channels. She's building a case for continued foster placement. But the system's rigged towards sending kids back, and the stepfather's got a lawyer who specializes in exactly this." "And?" Colt Bishop asked. Colt was the quiet one. Always had been. He spoke maybe 10 words a day, but each one landed like a dropped anvil. He had a purple heart in a drawer somewhere that he never mentioned and a limp in his left leg that he never explained. "And Avery told me to stay away from the hearing. She says if the club shows up, the lawyer will use us. Frame us as dangerous influence. Make the judge think the kid's better off back with his mother because at least she's not a biker." Silence. Drake tapped his index finger on the table. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was barely audible, but every man in the room heard it. "She's right," Drake said. Rhett looked at him. "She's right that they'll use us. She's right that a courtroom is not our territory. And she's right that the best thing we can do for that boy is stay out of the way and let the people with law degrees do their jobs." "And if their jobs aren't enough?" Rhett asked. Drake studied him. 23 years of brotherhood, 23 years of road, rain, blood, and silence. Drake knew every fault line in Rhett Mercer's character the way a geologist knows the fractures in stone, where they run, how deep they go, and what kind of pressure will make them split. "Then we deal with what comes after," Drake said. "But we don't go in there and give that lawyer ammunition, not for ego, not for anger, not even for the kid, because if we hand them a reason to send him back, then we're the ones who failed him." The vote was taken. Unanimous. The Black Vultures would not attend the hearing. Rhett voted with the table, but his hand, curled into a fist beneath the edge, told a different story. 3 days later, Rhett did something he couldn't explain to anyone, including himself. He drove to 412 Ridgeline Court, not on a bike. In his truck, a gray 2004 Silverado with rust on the wheel wells and a crack in the windshield that had been spreading since March. He parked across the street at 7:40 in the morning, engine idling, coffee going cold in a paper cup on the dash. The house was exactly what he'd imagined. Small ranch, aluminum siding gone gray, a chain-link fence around a yard with no grass. The driveway held a white long-haul cab without its trailer, parked at an angle that took up most of the space. Curtains drawn on every window. He sat there for 45 minutes. Nothing happened. Nobody came out. Nobody went in. The house sat there in the weak morning light like a held breath, and Rhett felt the cold creep into the cab around the edges of the doors and settle into his bones. He was about to leave when the front door opened. Dale Pittman stepped onto the porch. He was bigger than Rhett expected, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the thick, settled weight of a man who carried loads for a living. Sandy hair cropped short, a face that was aggressively ordinary, the kind of face you'd forget 10 seconds after seeing it, which Rhett understood immediately was part of the design. You couldn't be afraid of a face you couldn't remember. Pittman stood on the porch and lit a cigarette. He smoked it slowly, looking at nothing. Then his eyes drifted across the street to the idling Silverado. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't step back inside. He looked at Rhett the way a man looks at something he's already calculated, a distance, a weight, a risk, and found manageable. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, brief, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it was never meant to, the kind of smile that says, I know who you are and I'm not worried. Rhett's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He pulled away from the curb and drove back to the shop without looking in the rearview mirror. But the smile stayed with him, lodged behind his eyes like a splinter. He could still see it when he closed his eyes that night, lying on his back in his apartment above the hardware store, staring at the ceiling while the radiator clanked and the wind pushed against the windows, the smile of a man who had never been caught. 8 days before the hearing, Avery called an emergency meeting at her office, a converted insurance storefront on Main Street with water-stained ceiling tiles and a waiting room that smelled like old carpet. Rhett came alone. No cut, no club insignia, just a flannel shirt, work boots, and the legal pad in a manila envelope. Avery sat behind her desk with a file open in front of her. The file was thick, thicker than it had been 2 weeks ago, but the look on her face suggested that quantity and quality were not the same thing. I talked to the Porters, she said. They're willing to testify. Grant will speak to Samuel's progress. Evelyn documented his eating habits, his sleep patterns, the fact that he checks locks compulsively. It's good character testimony, but it's not evidence of what happened inside that house. What about the school? I pulled his records. Attendance is spotty. Grades dropped last year from B's to D's. 3 behavioral incidents, all described as withdrawn and unresponsive. No physical findings, no medical flags. The school counselor noted in February that Samuel appeared tired and disengaged and recommended a parent conference. Did it happen? Dale Pittman showed up. The mother didn't. Pittman told the counselor the boy was adjusting to the new family dynamic and that they were working with him at home. Counselor closed the note. Rhett stared at her. Closed it. There was no mandate to do anything else. The boy wasn't bruised. He wasn't failing. He was just disappearing. Avery met his eyes. Yes. Rhett opened the manila envelope and placed the legal pad on her desk. Every page filled with his small, precise handwriting. Dates, times, direct quotes, observations, the broken key, the word again, the park bench behind the dugout, the comment about breaking everything, the way Samuel ate, the way he watched doors, the carburetor, the way his hand steadied when they had something real to hold. Avery read for 10 minutes without speaking. When she looked up, her expression had shifted. Not hope. Avery didn't trade in hope. Something harder. Something with edges. This is detailed, she said. You told me to write it down. I did, and it's the best documentation I've seen from a non-professional source in 15 years. But Rhett, I need to be straight with you. This helps, but it might not be enough. Harwick will argue that you're biased, that you have an emotional attachment, that you're a member of a motorcycle club with no child welfare credentials and no legal standing. Well, everything on those pages is true. Truth and admissibility are not the same thing, not in family court. She closed the file, leaned back. The overhead light buzzed and flickered once. There is one thing that could change this. Tell me. Samuel needs to speak. Not through me, not through the porters, not through your notes. He needs to tell the judge, in his own words, what happened in that house. What it felt like to sleep in a park. What it meant to have the locks changed. If he can do that, if he can sit in front of Raymond Keach and make that man see what I see, then maybe. He's 11. I know. You're asking an 11-year-old to walk into a courtroom and tell a stranger the worst things that ever happened to him. I'm asking because nobody else can do it for him. That's the system, Rhett. It demands proof, and sometimes the only proof is a child's voice. Rhett stood up, walked to the window. Main Street stretched in both directions. Empty storefronts, a barber shop with a broken pole, the diner with its closed sign already up at 4 p.m. Calvary Falls, disappearing one business at a time, the same way Samuel had been disappearing one locked door at a time. I'll talk to him, Rhett said, gently. How else would I talk to him? Saturday. 5 days before the hearing. Temperature 18 degrees. The garage heaters couldn't keep up, and the concrete floor radiated cold through boot soles. Breath came out in small clouds. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Samuel arrived at 9. His cheeks were red, his eyes bright from the cold ride, and he went straight for the shovel head. They had the engine back together now. Cylinders honed, pistons ringed, heads torqued to spec. Today was the primary drive. Chain, clutch, sprocket. The guts of how power gets from the engine to the wheel. They worked for an hour before Rhett spoke. You know what's coming on Wednesday. Samuel's socket wrench paused mid-turn. Yeah. Avery thinks it would help if you talk to the judge. The wrench completed its turn. Then another. Then another. Each one deliberate, controlled, the sound of steel on steel in the cold garage, steady as a heartbeat. What would I say? The truth. Samuel set the wrench down, looked at the primary cover, looked at his hands, grease-blackened, capable, the hands of someone who had learned to build things because building was safer than feeling. I already told the truth. I told the social worker. I told the school counselor. I told you. Nothing happened. This is different. How? Because a judge has to listen. It's the law. Samuel looked at him, and in those two large brown eyes, Rhett saw something that nearly broke him. Not anger, not sadness, not fear. Exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a child who had spent his entire short life pushing a boulder uphill only to watch it roll back down every single time. And what if he listens, Samuel said slowly, and sends me back anyway? Rhett didn't have an answer. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing came. Because the boy was right. The boy had always been right. Adults make promises, judges make decisions, and children stand in the space between, holding broken keys and hoping the door opens. Then I'll be at the garage, Rhett said finally, and the door will still be open. Samuel stared at him for a long time. Okay, he said. I'll talk. He picked up the wrench and went back to work. The night before the hearing, Rhett sat alone in the garage after everyone else had gone. The shovelhead stood on its stand, engine complete, primary assembled, wiring nearly finished. A motorcycle that had been dead for 30 years slowly brought back to life by the hands of a man and a boy who needed the resurrection more than the machine did. His phone rang. Avery. We have a problem, she said, and the way she said it, flat, controlled, stripped of every ounce of professional composure that usually padded her voice, made Rhett's stomach drop. What? Judge Keach recused himself this morning. Family conflict of interest. His nephew works for the trucking company Dale Pittman drives for. The case has been reassigned. Rhett's hand found the edge of the workbench. To who? Judge Margaret Calloway. She's been on the family bench for 6 years. She's tough. She's fair. But Rhett, she's never seen this case before. She's coming in cold. No history, no background. She'll be reading the file for the first time tomorrow morning, hours before the hearing. So everything Avery built, the documentation, the pattern, the context, goes in front of a stranger who has to process it in real time while Harwick is standing there with a polished narrative about parental redemption and a clean home inspection. Rhett sank onto the stool. The garage was silent except for the tick of cooling heaters and the distant sound of wind against the metal walls. And there's one more thing, Avery said. I got a call from Grant Porter 20 minutes ago. Samuel's gone. The stool scraped against concrete as Rhett stood. What do you mean, gone? He was in his room after dinner. Evelyn checked on him at 8. By 9, the window was open and the bicycle was missing. They've driven every road between their house and town. He's not on any of them. Rhett was already reaching for his jacket. It's 14 degrees outside, Avery. I know. He's on a bicycle, in the dark. The hearing is in 11 hours. I know, Rhett. He grabbed his keys, shoved through the bay door into the parking lot. The cold hit him like a fist, sharp, immediate, the kind of cold that finds the gaps in your clothing and fills them with ice. His breath exploded in white clouds as he crossed to the truck. He was pulling onto Depot Street when his headlights caught something. Not on the road, on the sidewalk. A reflection, small, low, metallic. The blue and silver mountain bike leaning against the chain-link fence at the edge of the parking lot. And beyond it, sitting on the frozen ground with his back against the garage's side door, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around himself, shaking. Samuel. Rhett killed the engine. Got out. Walked through the dark with his boots crunching on frost and his heart hammering against his ribs. The boy looked up at him. His face was white. His lips had a blue tinge. His eyes were dry but enormous. 2 dark wells in a face stripped of everything except the raw, unfiltered terror of a child who had just made the most important decision of his life and had no idea if it was the right one. I'm not going back, Samuel said. His voice shook, but the words didn't. You can call whoever you want. You can call the police. You can call Avery. You can call the judge. But I'm not going back to that house. I will sleep in this parking lot. I will sleep in the park. I will sleep on the ground until the ground freezes solid, and I can't feel my hands anymore. But I am not going back. Rhett knelt. The frozen gravel bit into his knees. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders without a word. Samuel was trembling, not just from the cold, from something deeper, the full-body shaking of a system that had been holding itself together through sheer will and had finally, in the dark, in the cold, in the 14-degree silence of a dying town, run out of wire. Nobody's calling anyone, Rhett said. They'll make me go back. The judge, nobody is calling anyone, you hear me? Samuel's teeth chattered. His hands gripped the jacket around his shoulders. His knuckles were bone-white and raw. He'll be there tomorrow, Samuel whispered. Dale. He'll be sitting in the courtroom in his clean shirt and his good boots, and he'll look at the judge the same way he looks at the social worker, and the counselor, and my mom. And the judge will believe him, because that's what he does. He makes people believe. And then we'll drive home, and he'll pull into the driveway, and the neighbors will wave, and the door will close, and... His voice broke. Not dramatically, not with a sob. It cracked the way metal cracks under fatigue, a quiet fracture along a line that had been stressed too many times, invisible until the moment it fails. And nobody will know. Rhett sat down on the frozen ground next to him, shoulder to shoulder. 2 shapes in the dark against the corrugated wall of a biker garage in a town that had forgotten both of them. He didn't say it would be okay. He didn't say the system would work. He didn't say trust me, because the boy had already trusted more than any child should ever have to, and every institution that had received that trust had fumbled it. He said the only thing that was true. I'm not leaving. They sat there in the dark, in the cold, while the stars burned above Calvary Falls with the hard, indifferent brightness of things that exist too far away to help. Inside the garage, the shovel head waited on its stand, almost complete. And somewhere across town, in a small gray house with drawn curtains and a white truck in the driveway, Dale Pittman was laying out a clean shirt for the morning, rehearsing his smile in the bathroom mirror, and preparing to walk into a courtroom and convince one more stranger that nothing was wrong. The hearing was in 9 hours. Samuel was shaking, and every door the boy had ever trusted was about to be tested at once. Rhett carried the boy inside at 11:47 p.m. Not because Samuel asked, because Samuel's legs had stopped working properly somewhere around the 40-minute mark on the frozen ground. And when Rhett said, "Let's get you warm," the boy tried to stand and his knees buckled like a chair with a missing leg. Rhett caught him under the arms, lifted him the way you lift something that matters more than its weight, and walked him through the side door into the garage. The heaters had been off for 2 hours. The concrete was cold enough to feel through boot soles. Rhett kicked the nearest space heater on, then the second one, then the third. The orange coils began to glow, painting the dark shop in strips of amber light that crawled across engine blocks and tool chests and the silent bulk of the shovel head standing on its lift like a monument to unfinished things. He set Samuel on the cot, pulled the sleeping bag around him. The boy's shaking was violent now, not the controlled trembling of cold, but the systemic shudder of a body that had been running on adrenaline for hours and was finally crashing. His teeth clattered. His fingers, curled inside the sleeves of Rhett's jacket, were the color of candle wax. Rhett made coffee. Not because coffee was the right thing, hot chocolate would have been better, soup would have been smarter, but because the coffee maker was there and his hands needed a task, and the sound of water heating was better than the sound of a child shaking apart on a canvas cot. He called Avery first. "I have him. He's at the shop. He's cold, but he's okay." The relief in her exhale was audible. Then the professional steel returned. "The Porters? Call them. Tell them he's safe. Tell them I'll bring him to the courthouse in the morning." A pause. "Rhett, we talked about this. I'm not going inside. I'll drop him at the door. You take him in, but I'm driving him there. He came to me tonight because he trusts me, and I'm not handing him off to someone else at 3 in the morning. Not tonight." Avery was quiet for 6 seconds. Rhett counted. "Okay," she said. "Courthouse opens at 8. Hearings at 9:30. I'll meet you out front at 8:15. "Fine. And Rhett, make sure he eats something in the morning. Kids shut down on empty stomachs, and he's going to need every ounce of composure he's got." The line went dead. Rhett brought the coffee to the workbench nearest the cot. Samuel was still shaking, but less now. The heaters were doing their work. The sleeping bag rustled as the boy curled tighter inside it. "You should sleep," Rhett said. "Can't. Try. If I sleep, it'll be morning. And if it's morning, it's going to be morning whether you sleep or not. Might as well face it rested." Samuel's eyes found him in the dim light. "Are you coming? I'm driving you there." "That's not what I asked." Rhett sat on the stool next to the bench. The shop smelled like coffee and cold metal and the fading trace of gasoline. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, sharp, insistent, the sound bouncing off empty buildings and disappearing. "I can't go inside the courtroom," Rhett said. "If I do, the lawyer will use it against you, against us. Because you're a biker. Because the world doesn't see what I am. It sees what I look like." Samuel stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent tubes were off, but the heaters threw enough light to catch the angles of his face, the sharp jaw that hadn't filled out yet, the dark circles under his eyes, the hard line of a mouth that had learned to stay closed. "That's the same thing Dale does," the boy said. "He makes people see what he looks like instead of what he is." The words landed in the garage like a dropped wrench. Rhett felt them hit the floor of his chest and roll into a corner he'd been trying to keep clean. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The boy was right, and the symmetry was ugly, and the world didn't care about the difference between a man who looked dangerous and was safe and a man who looked safe and was dangerous. Samuel slept. Not peacefully. He twitched. His hands opened and closed inside the sleeping bag. Once, around 3 a.m., he made a sound. Not a word, not a cry, something between the two, the compressed syllable of a name or a plea that never fully formed before it dissolved back into silence. Rhett sat on the stool all night. He didn't sleep. He watched the heaters glow. He watched the boy breathe. He thought about the smile on Dale Pittman's porch, that small, calculated smile, and felt the same cold he'd felt sitting in an armored vehicle in mountains on the other side of the world, waiting for something to explode. At 5:30 a.m., he called Dex. "I need you at the shop." Dex didn't ask why. He arrived in 20 minutes with a bag from the gas station, 2 breakfast burritos, a carton of orange juice, and a chocolate bar that he left on the workbench without comment. "Heard he ran," Dex said. "He came here." "Smart kid." Dex looked at the sleeping boy. "Terrible situation. Smart kid." Rhett nodded. "Drake know?" "Not yet." Dex leaned against the tool chest, crossed his arms. The tattoo on his neck, a compass rose with a cracked face, shifted when he swallowed. You're going to the courthouse. I'm dropping him off. And then? And then I'm sitting in the parking lot. Dex studied him. The way men who've shared foxholes study each other, not for what's being said, but for what's being loaded. Rhett, whatever you're thinking about doing, I'm not thinking about anything. Yeah, that's what worries me. At 6:45, Samuel woke up. He sat up on the cot, looked around the garage with the rapid scan assessment of a child cataloging his environment, and located Rhett at the workbench. What time is it? Almost 7. The boy swung his legs off the cot. His color was better. The blue had left his lips, but his eyes carried something new, a flat, resolved quality, like a soldier who has accepted the mission and stopped hoping for a different one. He ate one of the burritos standing at the bench, drank the orange juice, folded the wrapper neatly, and placed it in the trash. I need to change clothes, he said. I can't go in front of a judge looking like this. Rhett looked at him, the oversized hoodie, the wrinkled jeans, the sneakers still damp from last night's ride. The boy was 11 years old and thinking about courtroom presentation. The disconnect between his age and his strategic awareness was the kind of thing that made Rhett want to put his fist through drywall. Avery's meeting us at 8:15. She'll have something. She won't know my size. Kid, she's been doing this for 15 years. She knows your size. Samuel almost smiled. The ghost of it crossed his face and disappeared before it could settle. They left the garage at 7:40. The morning was clear and brutally cold, the kind of Midwestern winter morning where the sky is so blue it hurts, and the air is so sharp it makes your lungs ache with every breath. Frost coated every surface. The truck's windshield took 4 minutes to defrost, and Samuel sat in the passenger seat with his hands between his knees, watching his breath fog the glass. Neither of them spoke on the drive. The county courthouse sat at the end of Market Street, a 2-story limestone building from 1923 with columns that had gone gray and a clock tower that hadn't worked since before Samuel was born. The parking lot was half empty at this hour, a few county vehicles, a maintenance truck, and a dark green sedan that Rhett recognized as Avery's. He pulled into a spot near the far end and killed the engine. Samuel didn't move. You don't have to do this, Rhett said. The boy looked at him. Yeah, I do. Because if I don't, they send me back. And if I go back, I disappear. And this time I might not find my way out. Rhett's throat closed. He nodded once. Avery was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She had a garment bag over one arm and a paper cup of hot chocolate in her free hand. She looked at Samuel with the practiced assessment of someone who had walked dozens of children into courtrooms and knew exactly what it cost every single one of them. You look like you slept in a garage, she said. I did. She held up the garment bag. Bathroom's inside to the left. Change. There's a comb in the side pocket. Samuel took the bag and the hot chocolate. He looked back at Rhett, who was standing by the truck with his hands in his pockets, and for a moment the distance between them, 30 feet of cracked asphalt and frozen air, felt like something much larger. Thank you, Samuel said. Rhett lifted his chin, a small movement, an acknowledgement that carried more weight than any word could have. The boy walked up the steps and disappeared inside. Rhett sat in the truck, engine off, window cracked an inch to let the cold air in because the alternative was fogging the glass and losing sight of the entrance. His hands rested on his thighs. His left knee bounced once, twice, then stopped. He watched. At 8:50, a silver Ford Explorer pulled into the lot. 2 people inside. The passenger door opened first and a woman stepped out, thin, early 30s, wearing a coat that was too big for her and sunglasses she didn't need on a day this bright. Her movements were careful, measured, the motions of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Samuel's mother. Rhett knew it without being told. The driver's door opened. Dale Pittman unfolded himself from behind the wheel. Clean shirt, good boots, hair combed. He adjusted his collar, shot his cuffs, and placed his hand on the small of the woman's back, a gesture that, from across a parking lot, looked protective, caring. The hand of a good husband guiding his wife through a difficult morning. But Rhett saw the way she stiffened under the touch, the microscopic flinch in her shoulder, the way her stride shortened by half an inch, calibrating itself to his pace rather than her own. His hands curled into fists on his thighs. A third car arrived. A black Lexus. The door opened and a man in a charcoal suit stepped out carrying a briefcase. Glenn Harwick. Even from a distance, Rhett could read the type. Pressed shirt, confident stride, the polished surface of someone who had turned other people's pain into billable hours and slept fine every night. Harwick shook Pittman's hand, leaned in, said something that made Pittman nod. Then all three of them walked up the courthouse steps and through the front door, and Rhett was alone in the parking lot with the engine ticking and the cold pressing against the windshield. The hearing started at 9:30. Rhett knew this because Avery had told him, and because at exactly 9:30 his phone buzzed with a single text. Starting now. He sat, watched the clock on the dash, watched the parking lot, watched the front door of the courthouse the way a man watches a surgery door, knowing that everything that matters is happening on the other side, and there's nothing to do except wait and not fall apart. At 10:15, his phone buzzed again. Not Avery. A number he didn't recognize. He opened the message. It was a photograph, a school photo, the kind taken against a blue background with the child's name printed at the bottom in white letters. The child was not Samuel. It was a girl, 7, maybe 8 years old. Brown hair in a ponytail, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Printed beneath the photo, Kaylee Pittman, grade 2. Rhett stared at the screen. His phone buzzed again. Same number. A text this time. She was Dale's daughter from his first marriage, Tulsa, 2017. CPS case closed after the mother recanted. Kaylee hasn't been seen by anyone since 2019. The mother stopped answering calls. Nobody followed up. Nobody ever follows up. Rhett stopped breathing. His thumb hovered over the screen. The cold from the cracked window poured across his hand, but he didn't feel it. The parking lot, the courthouse, the limestone columns, everything around him blurred into peripheral noise, while the photo held the center of his vision with the gravity of a black hole. A third message arrived. I'm the one who should have caught it. I didn't. I'm sending this to you because Avery trusts you and because that boy is sitting in a courtroom right now across from a man who has done this before. My name is Monica Vance. I am Samuel's biological aunt, and I have been trying to reach someone who would listen for 3 years. Rhett's hand was shaking. He dialed the number. It rang twice. You got the photo, the woman said. Her voice was tight, stripped, the voice of someone who had been carrying a secret that weighed more than her body. Who are you? I just told you. Monica Vance. Samuel's father was my brother. He died when Samuel was 4, truck accident. After that, his mother, Karen, fell apart. Prescription pills first, then other things. She met Dale 2 years later. He moved in fast, too fast. I tried to tell Karen. She stopped returning my calls. Rhett gripped the phone. The girl in the photo, Kaylee. Dale's daughter from his first marriage in Tulsa. He had partial custody until 2017. His ex-wife, a woman named Dina, filed a CPS complaint. Kaylee was showing up at school with stories that didn't match the bruises. CPS investigated. Dina recanted 2 weeks later. The case was closed. Why did she recant? Because Dale convinced her she was wrong. The same way he convinces everyone. He sits in a room, and he talks, and he smiles, and people believe him because it's easier to believe a man in a clean shirt than to believe a 7-year-old with bruises she can't explain. Rhett closed his eyes. Where's Kaylee now? The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. 5, 6. I don't know, Monica said. That's why I'm calling you. Dina moved after the recantation, changed her number, pulled Kaylee out of school. Nobody's heard from either of them since October 2019. I hired a private investigator last year. He found the last known address in Oklahoma City. The apartment was empty, lease terminated, no forwarding. The truck cab felt like it was shrinking. Rhett's vision tunneled, the dashboard, the windshield, the frozen parking lot. Everything contracted to a point centered on the phone in his hand and the voice coming through it. 3 years, he said. You've known about this for 3 years. I've been trying for 3 years. I called CPS in Tulsa. I called CPS in Illinois. I wrote letters. I left messages. I filed reports. Do you know what happens when you file a report about a man with no criminal record and a clean home inspection? Nothing. That's what happens. The file goes into a drawer and the drawer closes and the child stays exactly where they are. Rhett opened his eyes, stared at the courthouse. Inside that building, right now, an 11-year-old boy was sitting in front of a judge he'd never met, trying to explain a kind of damage that doesn't leave marks, while the man who inflicted it sat 20 feet away in a clean shirt and good boots, smiling. And that man had done it before. "I need you to send everything you have to Avery Cole," Rhett said. "Every document, every report, the investigator's file, the photo, everything, right now." "I don't know who—" "She's the child advocate representing Samuel. She's inside that courthouse right now. I'm going to give you her number, and you're going to send her everything before that hearing ends. Do you understand me?" "Yes." He gave her the number. Then he hung up and called Avery. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. She was in a courtroom, phones off, protocol. The system and its rituals grinding forward on schedule while the ground shifted underneath it. He texted, "Check your messages. Urgent, there's another child." Tulsa. "Dale has a prior CPS case. His daughter Kaylee hasn't been seen since 2019. Samuel's aunt is sending you everything. Do not let that hearing close." He sent it, stared at the screen, waited for the delivered confirmation. Then he got out of the truck. The cold hit him full force. He crossed the parking lot in long strides, his boots cracking the frost, his breath streaming behind him in white clouds. The courthouse steps rose ahead of him, 12 steps, limestone, worn smooth by a century of feet. He took them two at a time. The lobby was quiet. Marble floor, a directory board on the wall, a metal detector staffed by a deputy who looked up from his phone and registered Rhett's appearance. Flannel shirt, work boots, grease-stained hands, the posture of a man who had been in combat and never fully left, with the slow, assessing gaze of someone deciding whether to ask questions. "Family court," Rhett said. "Which floor?" "Second, room 204, but you can't go in if the hearing's in session." Rhett walked past him. The deputy said something else, louder, with more authority, but Rhett was already at the stairs, taking them two at a time, his hand on the railing for balance because his legs were moving faster than his judgment, and he knew it. Second floor. Hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzing above polished tile. The smell of old paper and floor wax. Room 204 at the end of the hall, double doors closed, a brass plate with the room number and the words "Family Division" etched in block letters. He stopped. His hand was on the door handle. Through the wood, muffled, he could hear voices. He couldn't make out words, just the cadence of legal proceedings, the measured rhythm of question and response, and once, just once, a voice so young and so steady that it made his chest constrict. Samuel. The boy was talking, telling his story, in his own words, to a stranger in a black robe, in a room full of adults who held his future in their hands. Rhett stood there, his fingers white on the handle. Every instinct he had, every reflex forged in combat, every protective impulse the club had built into his bones, screamed at him to open that door. But Avery's voice echoed in his skull. "If you go in there, they'll use you. You become the threat. You become the reason they send him back." He released the handle, stepped back, leaned against the wall opposite the door and pressed his palms flat against the cold plaster. His heart was hammering. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the chill. He could feel the phone in his pocket like a weight. Monica's messages, the photo of Kaylee, the entire hidden architecture of Dale Pittman's history sitting in a device 6 inches from his hand, while the hearing proceeded without it on the other side of a door he couldn't open. His phone buzzed. "Avery. Got it. Requesting recess now." Rhett exhaled. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the tile floor, knees up, forearms resting on them, head bowed. A man in a courthouse hallway, sitting on the ground like a vagrant, breathing through his teeth. 3 minutes passed. Maybe 5. The doors opened. Avery came out first. She looked like she'd been hit by something, not physically, but the way a person looks when a case they thought they understood has just revealed a basement they didn't know existed. Her face was tight. Her eyes moved fast. She saw Rhett on the floor and crossed to him in 4 strides. "How long have you known?" she asked. 20 minutes. His aunt called me." "The aunt, Monica Vance." She says she's been trying to reach someone for 3 years. Avery pressed her fist against her mouth, held it there. A gesture that was not about silence, but about containment. The physical effort of keeping everything she was feeling inside her body instead of letting it detonate in a courthouse hallway. I pulled up the Tulsa records during recess, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The CPS case was opened in April 2017 and closed in June. Closed because the mother recanted. The file has exactly 4 pages. 4 pages for a child who described, she stopped, swallowed. It doesn't matter what she described. It was enough for a case to be opened, and not enough for it to stay open. And now nobody knows where that little girl is. Can you use it? I already handed the judge a motion to suspend the hearing pending investigation. Harwick objected. He called it hearsay and character assassination. And the judge? Avery's jaw tightened. Judge Calloway looked at the photo. She looked at the Tulsa file. Then she looked at Dale Pittman. And for the first time in the hearing, she didn't look like a judge. She looked like a woman who just realized the man sitting in her courtroom might be something much worse than a petitioner. Did she grant the suspension? She recessed for 30 minutes. She's reviewing the file now, but Rhett, Harwick is good. He's already framing this as a last-minute ambush from biased parties. He's going to argue that an uninvestigated CPS case from another state filed by an estranged relative has no legal bearing on the current petition, and he might be right. Rhett stood up. Where's Samuel? In the courtroom with the guardian ad litem. He testified for 12 minutes before the recess. Rhett. She paused. Her voice cracked for the first time. He was remarkable. He sat in that chair and he told Judge Calloway exactly what he told you. The locks, the park, the words, all of it. He didn't cry. He didn't perform. He just told the truth. Like he was reading a diagnostics report on his own damage. And Pittman? Avery's eyes went cold. He sat there, hands folded, face calm. He looked at Samuel the entire time the boy was speaking. Not angry, not threatened. Patient. The way someone looks when they're waiting for a storm to pass because they know the weather always changes. Rhett felt the floor shift under his feet. Not literally, something deeper. The recognition that they were not fighting a custody case. They were fighting a pattern, a system of behavior so practiced, so polished, so perfectly calibrated to the machinery of institutional trust that it had been operating for years across multiple states, without triggering a single alarm. There's something else, Avery said. She reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a folded printout. Monica sent me the investigator's report. I only had time to scan the first 2 pages during recess, but there's a detail in here that changes everything. She unfolded the paper. Dale Pittman has had 3 marriages, not 2. 3. The first was in Reno, 2009. The wife's name was Christine Avila. They had no children together, but Christine had a daughter from a previous relationship, a girl named Megan. She was 9 when Dale moved in. Rhett's blood went cold. Christine filed for divorce in 2011. No CPS complaint, no police report. But the divorce filing includes a handwritten note from Christine's attorney, not part of the official record, just a margin note in the file, that says, and I'm quoting from the investigator's transcription, client reports stepdaughter's behavioral changes consistent with household disturbance. Client unwilling to elaborate. Case proceeded as no fault. The hallway was silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. 3 families, Rhett said. 3 states. 3 women. 3 children. And not a single conviction, not a single sustained finding, not even a single case that stayed open long enough to produce one. Rhett looked at the closed doors of room 204. Behind those doors, an 11-year-old boy was sitting in a chair designed for adults, in a building designed for procedure, in a system designed for efficiency, and the man who had brought this pattern to 3 families across 3 states was sitting 20 feet away, waiting for the weather to change. We're not fighting a custody case, Rhett said. No, Avery said. We're not. Does the judge have this? I'm about to give it to her, but Rhett, I need you to leave, right now, before the hearing resumes. If Harwick sees you in this hallway, he will use it. He will say the boy's testimony was coached by a member of an outlaw motorcycle club who showed up at the courthouse in violation of the court's expectation of a neutral environment. It doesn't matter that it's not true. It matters that it's plausible. Rhett looked at the door. I need to see him. You can't. He's in there alone. He's not alone. I'm going back in. The guardian ad litem is with him. And Rhett, he's stronger than you think. He sat in that chair and he didn't flinch. Not once. He looked at Dale Pittman and he didn't look away. Whatever you gave that boy in your garage, whatever you taught him with those engine parts and that workbench and those Saturday mornings, it held. It's holding right now. Rhett's eyes burned. He blinked, looked at the ceiling, looked at the floor, looked anywhere except at the woman in front of him, because if he met her eyes, he was going to lose the last wall holding him together. Tell him the door's open, he said. He knows. Rhett walked down the hallway, down the stairs, past the deputy and the metal detector and the marble lobby with its directory board and its century of footsteps ground into the stone. He pushed through the front door into the cold and the light and the blue sky that didn't care about any of it. He sat in the truck. He didn't start the engine. His phone sat in his hand. The photo of Kaylee Pittman, a 7-year-old girl with a ponytail and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, stared up at him from the screen. Where are you? He thought. Where did they put you when the system looked away? At 11:42, Avery texted. Hearing suspended, Judge Calloway ordered a full investigation into Dale Pittman's history across all 3 states. CPS has been contacted in Tulsa and Reno. Reunification petition is on hold pending results. Samuel stays with the Porters. Rhett read it twice. Then a second message. But Rhett, Pittman walked out of that courtroom and he wasn't angry. He wasn't panicked. He shook Harwick's hand. He put his arm around Karen. He walked to his car like a man leaving a business meeting that had been rescheduled. He was calm. A third message. Men like him don't get calm when they're losing. They get calm when they're planning. Rhett stared at the screen. The parking lot was emptying. The morning's business was concluding. Somewhere inside the courthouse, a boy was sitting with a guardian ad litem, learning that he would not be sent back today. Learning that the system, for once, had paused, had listened, had not yet failed him. But Rhett wasn't thinking about the hearing. He was thinking about the silver Explorer that was no longer in the parking lot, about Dale Pittman's calm handshake and measured stride, about a man who had moved through 3 states and 3 families like smoke through a keyhole, leaving no evidence, no record, no trail, and who had just watched the first real threat to that pattern walk into a courtroom in the form of an 11-year-old boy with steady hands and a voice that didn't shake. Rhett started the truck. He pulled out of the lot and turned onto Market Street. His hands were steady on the wheel. His breathing was even. But behind his eyes, in the place where the war had never fully ended, a tactical calculation was running, the same cold automatic assessment that had once told him where the IED was buried, where the sniper was positioned, where the ambush would come from. Dale Pittman was not a man who accepted setbacks. Dale Pittman was a man who eliminated witnesses. And Samuel Vance, the first child who had ever spoken in a courtroom about what happened behind closed doors, had just put a target on his own back. Rhett reached for his phone and dialed Drake. We need a meeting, tonight. Full table, no exceptions. Drake's voice came back steady. What happened? Everything changed, and it's about to get worse. He hung up and drove toward the garage, watching the rearview mirror the way he hadn't watched one since the last time someone was trying to follow him home from a place where following meant something that ended with a body bag. The mirror was empty. But Rhett knew, the way a man knows weather or war or the sound of a round being chambered in a dark room, that it wouldn't stay that way for long. The meeting started at 9 p.m. Full table. No exceptions. 12 men sat in the back room of the Black Vultures clubhouse, under a single hanging shop light that swayed when the wind hit the building hard enough to make the walls groan. The light threw shadows across the table that moved like living things, stretching over scarred knuckles and leather cuts and coffee mugs that nobody was drinking from because coffee wasn't what the room needed. The room needed something stronger than caffeine and more dangerous than whiskey, and every man at the table knew it. Drake Vossler sat at the head. His hands were flat on the oak surface. His eyes moved from face to face with the slow, deliberate scan of a man counting his resources before committing them to a fight he hadn't chosen. Rhett stood. He didn't sit, couldn't. His body was running on something that had bypassed exhaustion 4 hours ago and entered a state that combat veterans recognize but never name. The electric stillness that comes when the threat is confirmed, the parameters are known, and the only thing left is the decision to move. He told them everything. Monica Vance, the phone call, the photo of Kaylee Pittman, the Tulsa CPS case, opened and closed in 8 weeks, Christina Villa in Reno, the investigator's margin note about behavioral changes, 3 families, 3 states, 3 children, and a man who walked out of a courthouse that afternoon with his hand on his wife's back and a smile that hadn't changed since the porch. The room was silent when he finished, not the polite silence of men processing information, the pressurized silence of something about to rupture. Trix Maynard spoke first. "Where's the boy right now?" "Porter's house. Avery confirmed an hour ago. He's there. He's safe. For now." "For now?" Trix repeated. The words tasted wrong in his mouth. He spat them out like a bad bearing. Colt Bishop leaned forward. His hands, massive, scarred across every knuckle, the hands of a man who had once field-stripped a weapon while bleeding from a shrapnel wound he didn't notice for 20 minutes, rested on the table with a stillness that contradicted everything happening behind his eyes. "Pittman walked out calm," Colt said. "Not a question." "Calm," Rhett confirmed. "Then he's already moving." Drake's finger tapped the table. The room snapped to him. "We are not vigilantes," Drake said. His voice was level, measured, the same voice he'd used in a desert 11,000 miles away when his platoon was surrounded, and the only options were bad and worse. "We are not going to ride to this man's house and put hands on him. That is not what this club is. That is not what we do. Am I clear?" Silence. "Am I clear?" "Clear," the table said. Not in unison, in sequence, each man finding the word at his own speed, like the cylinders of an engine firing in order. "Good. Now." Drake looked at Rhett. "What does Avery need from us?" Eyes. "The Porter's property is 12 miles outside of town. Rural road. No neighbors within sight line. One access point, a gravel drive off County Road 9. If Pittman decides the boy is a problem, that house is isolated enough to give him options." "Options," Boone said from the corner. He'd been silent until now, sitting in the shadows with his reading glasses on his forehead and his arms crossed over a chest that still carried the muscle of a man who'd worked steel for 30 years before his body told him to stop. "You're saying he might come for the kid." "I'm saying a man who's made 3 children disappear from 3 different systems doesn't react to the first one who talks by sitting at home and hoping for the best." The room processed this. You could feel it. The collective recalculation, the shift from concern to operational awareness. These men had been civilians for years, some of them for decades, but the training never leaves, it just waits, dormant, coiled, ready for the moment when the world stops being safe enough to pretend otherwise. Drake stood up. "Dex, you and Trix take first shift. Park at the junction of County Road 9 and the access drive. You see any vehicle approach that property after dark, you call me. You don't engage, you don't confront. You observe and report." "And if it's him?" Dex asked. "Then you call me, and I call the sheriff, and we do this the right way." "The sheriff," Trix said. He didn't add what every man in the room was thinking. The sheriff of Franklin County was a man named Roy Scotton, who had held the office for 14 years by being exactly friendly enough to every constituency that mattered and exactly absent enough from every crisis that didn't. Roy Scadden was not a man who would drive 12 miles down a county road at midnight on the word of a motorcycle club. Drake heard the silence, understood it. "The right way," he repeated. "First. Always first. And if the right way fails, then we'll have the conversation nobody wants to have. But we try. We try because that boy deserves adults who follow through, not adults who skip steps because they're angry." The meeting broke at 10:15. Dex and Trix left immediately, their bikes growling through the parking lot and fading into the dark. Colt and Boone stayed to discuss logistics, shift rotations, communication protocol, contingencies. The language was military. The intent was civilian. The gap between those two things vibrated in every sentence. Rhett didn't go home. He sat in the garage after everyone left, at the bench next to the shovelhead, staring at the engine the boy had helped rebuild. His phone lay face up on the steel surface. He was waiting for it to ring. He didn't know what he was hoping to hear. He just knew that the silence felt like a countdown, and every minute that passed without a call was another minute of pressure building in a system that was going to blow. At midnight, his phone lit up. Dex. All clear, no movement. Cold as death out here, but nothing on the road. Rhett texted back. Stay. At 2 a.m., a second text from Dex. Still clear. Trix is asleep in his saddle. If he snores any louder, the coyotes are going to file a complaint. Rhett didn't smile. He stared at the message until the screen went dark. At 6:14 a.m., his phone rang. Not Dex, not Avery, not Drake. Grant Porter. Rhett. Grant's voice was wrong. The retired shop teacher, a man whose natural register was quiet, careful, the voice of someone who measured twice and never cut once, sounded like he'd swallowed gravel. Something happened. Rhett was on his feet before the second sentence. Samuel's fine. He's in the house. He's safe. But someone was here. But when? Last night. Between 1 and 4. I can't be more specific. I got up to use the bathroom around 4:30, and I looked out the kitchen window. There were tire tracks in the yard. Fresh. Someone drove up to the property, circled around to the back of the house, and left. The tracks go right past Samuel's window. Rhett's hand gripped the phone so hard the case creaked. Evelyn found something else this morning, Grant continued. On the back porch. A cigarette butt. Smoked down to the filter, crushed out on the porch rail. Whoever was here stood on our porch in the dark and smoked a cigarette while looking through the window of a child's bedroom. The garage spun. Rhett grabbed the edge of the workbench. His vision narrowed. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to pulse, and for a moment he was back in the mountains, back in the dark, back in the vehicle, back in the place where the world reduces itself to a single point of focus, because focus is the only thing between you and the thing that's trying to kill you. Did you call the sheriff? Called at 5. Left a message. Nobody's called back. Lock the doors. Stay inside. Don't let Samuel out of your sight. I'm coming. He hung up. Called Drake. He was there. Drake didn't ask who. Tire tracks in the yard. Cigarette butt on the back porch. Right outside Samuel's window. Grant found it this morning. Drake's breathing changed. The phone carried it, a single deep intake through the nose, held, released. The breath of a man making a decision that would cost something regardless of which way it went. Meet me at the shop in 20 minutes, Drake said. I'm already here. Then stay there? Drake arrived in 15. He came alone, on his bike, the engine cutting through the morning quiet like a blade through cloth. He walked into the garage with his cut zipped against the cold, and his face set in the expression Rhett had seen only 3 times in 23 years. The expression that meant the conversation was over and the operation had begun. I called Roy Scodden, Drake said. And? He'll send a deputy to take a report. Sometime today. Maybe. Maybe. His words. He said tire tracks and a cigarette butt don't constitute a crime. He said he can't dispatch resources based on speculation. Rhett's jaw locked. The muscles in his neck corded like bridge cable. He's protecting his budget, Drake said, and his re-election. A custody dispute involving a biker club and a trucker with no record is not something Roy Scodden is going to spend political capital on. So we're on our own. Drake looked at him. 23 years of road and rain and blood and brotherhood compressed into a single glance. We've always been on our own, Rhett. That's why the club exists. Within the hour, the operation was in motion. Boone and Colt drove to the Porter property in Boone's pickup. No bikes, no cuts, no insignia. They looked like 2 retired tradesmen visiting friends. They parked in the driveway and went inside, and within 30 minutes they'd installed motion sensor lights on all 4 corners of the house, checked every window lock, and secured the back porch with a battery-powered trail camera that Colt had pulled from his hunting supplies. Dex and Trix maintained their position at the junction. They'd been there all night. Their faces were gray with cold and fatigue, their coffee thermoses long empty, but neither of them mentioned leaving. Rhett drove to the property. He pulled up the gravel drive at 8:30 a.m. and saw the tire tracks immediately. They came off the county road, crossed the front yard, not the driveway, the yard, which meant the driver had deliberately avoided the gravel to minimize noise, and curved around the east side of the house to the back. Deep treads, wide wheelbase, the kind of tires you'd find on a long-haul cab. He followed the tracks on foot. They led directly to the back of the house, to the porch, to the window of the room where Samuel slept. The cigarette butt was gone. Evelyn had photographed it and sealed it in a plastic bag, the instinct of a woman who understood that evidence doesn't wait for officials. But the scorch mark on the porch rail was still there, a small black circle on painted wood, the exact diameter of a cigarette pressed against a surface by a thumb. Rhett stared at the mark. He could see it. Not just the mark, the entire scene. A man in the dark, standing on a stranger's porch at 3 a.m, smoking, patient, looking through a window at a sleeping child. Not rushing, not panicking, taking his time. Because men like Dale Pittman don't panic. They calculate, they assess, they decide. And then they act. Rhett went inside. Samuel was at the kitchen table with a glass of milk and a plate of toast he hadn't touched. He was wearing a flannel shirt that was too big for him, one of Grant's, and his hair was uncombed, and his eyes had the glazed, distant look of someone who had been told something terrible and was still waiting for the fear to arrive. "Grant told me," Samuel said before Rhett could speak. Rhett sat down across from him. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast and the faint chemical sweetness of the motion sensor lights that Boone had just finished mounting outside the window. "You're safe," Rhett said. "That's what everybody says." Samuel's voice was thin, stretched. The calm that had carried him through the courtroom was gone, and in its place was something raw, the exposed nerve of a child who had spent his whole life running from a threat that kept finding him. "They said I was safe at the house on Ridgeline. They said I was safe when the social worker came. They said I was safe when CPS closed the file. And then the locks changed, and then the food stopped, and then Dale—" He stopped. His hands were shaking. The glass of milk trembled between his fingers. Rhett reached across the table. Not to touch the boy. He'd learned that Samuel didn't respond well to uninvited contact, but to place his own hand flat on the table, palm down, steady and visible. An anchor. A fixed point in a room that was spinning. "I know what he did," Rhett said. Samuel's eyes snapped to his face. "I know about Kaylee. I know about the family in Reno, and I know he was here last night." The boy's chin dropped. His shoulders curved inward. The posture of a structure collapsing from the center, folding in on itself because the supports were never strong enough for the weight they were asked to carry. "He'll keep coming," Samuel whispered. "He doesn't stop. He never stops. He just waits, and then he comes back, and everybody forgets to watch." "Nobody's forgetting. You don't understand. He's smarter than everyone thinks. He knows how to make people tired. He waits until they stop paying attention, until the camera runs out of batteries, until the deputy stops driving by, until the social worker moves on to the next case. And then one night the door opens and he's standing there and he says—" Samuel's voice broke. Not like before. Not the controlled crack of a boy managing his own collapse. This was something deeper. The fracture of a child who had been carrying a secret so heavy that the act of naming it out loud was physically painful. "He says if I tell anyone, he'll do to me what he did to Kaylee." The kitchen went silent. Grant Porter, standing in the doorway, pressed his hand against the frame so hard his knuckles popped. Evelyn, behind him, turned away. Rhett didn't move. His hand stayed flat on the table. His eyes stayed on the boy. Every muscle in his body had locked into the specific rigidity of a man exercising maximum control over maximum rage. The kind of control that doesn't eliminate the fury but channels it downward, into the foundation, where it transforms from emotion into structure, into resolve. "He said that to you," Rhett said. Not a question. Samuel nodded. His face was wet now. Not sobbing, just wet. Tears running silently, without sound, the way a pipe leaks when the pressure exceeds the capacity of the seal. "When?" "Before I left. The night the locks changed the last time. He was in the kitchen. My mom was in the bedroom. He knelt down and he grabbed my arm and he said it quiet, like he was telling me a secret. He said Kaylee talked too, and now nobody knows where Kaylee is. Rhett stood up. He walked to the kitchen window, looked out at the yard, the tire tracks, the gray sky, the empty county road stretching toward a town that had turned its back on everything it was too tired to protect. He took out his phone and called Avery. "I need you at the Porter house, now." Samuel just disclosed a direct threat. Dale told him he'd do to him what he did to Kaylee. Those are the words. Direct, specific. Said to a minor. "Get here, bring a recorder, and call the state police because Roy Scotton isn't going to do a thing." He hung up before she could respond. Then he called Drake. "We're past the right way," Rhett said. Drake was quiet for 3 seconds. "What do you need?" "Every brother who can ride at the Porter property. Not to fight, to stand. I want bikes on that road from sundown to sunup until the state police take custody of Dale Pittman. I want the sound of engines so loud that every person in this county knows that someone is watching that house." "That's going to make noise, Rhett, the kind we can't take back." "Good. I'm done being quiet." Drake paused. When he spoke, his voice carried something Rhett hadn't heard in 23 years. Not anger, not authority, but the particular weight of a man who has decided to put his name on a line that cannot be erased. Full chapter, 30 minutes. By 4 p.m., the Porter property looked like a forward operating base. 8 motorcycles lined the gravel drive, their chrome catching the weak afternoon light. Not parked randomly, positioned, facing the road. Visible from every approach. A wall of steel and leather that said nothing and communicated everything. The brothers didn't stand on the porch. They didn't crowd the house. They spread along the property line with the quiet discipline of men who understood that presence was more powerful than action. Decks at the junction. Tricks by the mailbox. Colt walking the tree line with a flashlight and a thermos, checking sight lines with the automatic precision of a man who had done perimeter security in places where the consequences of missing something were counted in body bags. Boone on the front porch in a camp chair with a shotgun across his knees, not loaded, not brandished, just present, the way a statement is present in a room where it doesn't need to be repeated. Drake sat in his truck at the end of the drive, engine off, window down, phone in his hand. He was the command post. Every movement, every vehicle, every headlight on County Road 9 was reported to him, and he logged each one in a notebook with the same discipline he'd used to track patrol routes in another life. Samuel watched from the kitchen window. He stood with his forehead against the glass, his breath fogging a small circle that he wiped away with his sleeve every few seconds, watching the men on the property below. 8 men in leather cuts, standing in the cold, saying nothing, guarding a house that wasn't theirs because a boy who wasn't their blood had become their responsibility. Grant stood behind him. "You know those men?" Grant asked. "Yeah." "You trust them?" Samuel watched Rhett, who was standing near the first bike with his arms crossed, scanning the road with the tireless focus of a man who had replaced sleep with purpose. "They're the only ones who never left," Samuel said. At 5:47 p.m., Avery arrived with a state police investigator named Holt, a tall, angular woman with a lined face and the demeanor of someone who had spent 20 years in law enforcement and had stopped being surprised by anything except the specific ways institutions failed children. She interviewed Samuel for 45 minutes in the Porter's living room while Avery recorded and the rest of the house held its breath. At 6:32 p.m., Holt came outside. She looked at the motorcycles, at the men, at the silent, organized perimeter of bikers standing guard in the fading light. "Who's in charge?" she asked. Drake stepped forward. "Dale Pittman's truck is not at 412 Ridgeline Court," Holt said. "The house is dark. His wife is not answering the door. His cell phone is going to voicemail. Wherever he is, he's not where we expected him to be." The temperature dropped 3 degrees in the time it took her to finish the sentence. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the cold was already there and the words just made it visible. "The boy's disclosure is enough for an arrest warrant," Holt continued. "Threatening a minor with implied violence constitutes felony intimidation under state statute. Combined with the Tulsa file and the Reno file and the tire tracks at this property, I have enough to bring him in, but I need to find him first." "He's running," Rhett said. "Maybe. Or maybe he's doing what men like him always do when the walls start closing in. He's not running from us. He's running toward something. Rhett looked at her. Meaning? Meaning men who've been controlling children for decades don't suddenly lose their pattern when they get cornered. They escalate. They reach for the thing that gives them power. And the thing that gave Dale Pittman power was access. The word sat in the cold air between them. Access. The word that turned a predator from dangerous to immediate. The word that separated a threat from a crisis. Karen, Avery said from the porch, Samuel's mother, if she's not answering the door. I've already dispatched a unit to Ridgeline, Holt said. They'll make entry if necessary. And if she's not there either? Holt didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence did the work. At 7:15 p.m., Holt's radio crackled. She walked to her cruiser, listened, spoke in clipped sentences that the wind shredded before they reached the porch. When she came back, her face had changed. The professional mask was still there, but beneath it, in the muscles around her eyes, in the set of her jaw, in the way she held her shoulders, something had shifted from procedural to urgent. 412 Ridgeline is empty, she said. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle. Karen Vance's phone and purse are on the kitchen counter. Her car is in the driveway, but she's not in the house. He took her, Rhett said. We don't know that yet. He took her because she's the last person who can testify to what happened in that house. She's been living with him for 4 years. She knows everything. And now that the investigation is open, she's either a witness or a loose end, and Dale Pittman doesn't leave loose ends. Holt studied him. Her eyes were gray, hard, the eyes of someone who had learned to evaluate people the way a mechanic evaluates engines, by what they did under pressure, not by what they said at rest. You're not wrong, she said, but I can't act on analysis. I need evidence. The tire tracks are evidence. The cigarette butt is evidence. The boy's disclosure is evidence. The Tulsa file is evidence. How much do you need before someone actually moves? I'm moving right now, Mr. Mercer, but I have to move within the law, or anything I do gets thrown out, and this man walks free. Again, like he's walked free every other time. Is that what you want? Rhett's hands curled at his sides. Every tendon in his forearms stood out like cable under tension. He held the fist for 5 seconds. 6, 7. Then he opened them, deliberately, one finger at a time. No, he said. Then let me do my job. Keep your men on this property. Keep that boy inside, and keep your phone on. She got in the cruiser and pulled out of the drive, her taillights painting the gravel red as she turned onto County Road 9 and disappeared. The dark came fast. December dark in rural Illinois is not the gradual dimming of a city. It arrives like a door closing. One moment the sky holds the last gray trace of daylight, and the next, the world is black. Stars appeared, hard and sharp. The temperature fell through the 20s and kept going. Breath crystallized. Chrome froze. And 8 men in leather stood on a property they'd never been invited to, guarding a boy they couldn't legally protect, waiting for a threat they couldn't see. Rhett stood at the end of the driveway. The road stretched in both directions, empty, the white center line fading into darkness in each direction like a path into nothing. The trees on both sides were bare, skeletal shapes against the sky, their branches rattling in the wind like bones in a drawer. His phone buzzed. Dex, from the junction, headlights on County Road 9, moving slow, half-mile out. Rhett's entire body activated. The fatigue, the cold, the 36 hours without sleep, all of it vaporized in the instant between reading the message and lifting his eyes to the road. He texted back. Description. Dex. Can't tell yet. Single vehicle. Moving well below speed limit. No turn signal. Rhett turned toward the house. Colt was already at the tree line, flashlight off, invisible in the dark. Trix had moved from the mailbox to a position behind Boone's truck, where the angle gave him a clear view of the entire driveway. Boone hadn't moved from the porch. The shotgun was still across his knees. Inside the house, the kitchen light was on, a single yellow square in the dark. Samuel's silhouette was visible in the window, small and still. Rhett's phone buzzed again. Dex. It's a white cab, no trailer, moving toward the access drive. The world contracted. Every sound sharpened. The wind in the bare trees, the tick of cooling engines, the creak of leather as 8 men shifted their weight in the dark. Rhett's heartbeat filled his ears. Not fast, steady, the rhythm of a man who had been trained to breathe through the moment when everything narrows to a single point, and the only thing that exists is the next 3 seconds. The headlights appeared at the end of the access drive. White, bright, the high beams of a vehicle making no effort to conceal its approach. The cab turned onto the gravel. It moved slowly up the drive, its engine a low diesel rumble that vibrated through the frozen ground. The headlights swept across the parked motorcycles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And for a moment the chrome blazed in the light like a row of shields. The cab stopped, 50 feet from the house. Engine idling, headlights on, the driver invisible behind the glare. Nobody moved. The diesel engine rumbled. Exhaust rose from the tailpipe in white clouds that the headlights turned into ghosts. The cab sat there, idling, its presence filling the driveway with the specific menace of a machine that has no business being in this place at this hour. Rhett walked toward it, not running, not hesitating, walking. The way he'd walked toward the boy in the rain, the way he'd walked toward Eddie Culp in the garage. The measured, deliberate stride of a man who has decided that the next thing that happens will be determined by him and no one else. Drake's voice came from behind him, low, controlled. "Rhett!" He didn't stop. The headlights hit him full force. He walked into them with his eyes narrowed and his hands at his sides and his shadow stretching behind him across the frozen gravel like something being pulled from his body. He stopped 10 feet from the cab. The driver's door opened. Dale Pittman stepped down from the running board, clean boots on gravel. The sound was small and precise, like a period at the end of a sentence. He stood in the wash of his own headlights, tall, thick, unremarkable, and looked at Rhett with the same expression he'd worn on the porch. The same flat, calculated assessment. The same smile that wasn't a smile. "Came to see my boy," Pittman said. His voice was calm, conversational. The voice of a neighbor stopping by to return a borrowed tool. "He's not your boy. Court says different. Court's got your file now. 3 states, 3 families. They've got all of it." Pittman's expression didn't change. The smile held. But something moved behind his eyes. A flicker, brief, the way a flame moves when a door opens in a closed room. Not fear, recognition. The acknowledgement that the game had changed, but not the belief that he could still win it. "I just want to talk to him," Pittman said. 5 minutes, father to son. "You're not his father. You're not anything to him. And you're standing on private property at 9 o'clock at night surrounded by men who know exactly what you are." Pittman looked past Rhett, at the motorcycles, at the men in the dark, at the shapes standing along the property line like a wall that had grown from the frozen earth. His smile widened. "Bikers," he said. "That's your play? A bunch of bikers on a lawn?" He shook his head, slow, amused. The head shake of a man who believes he is the smartest person in every room he enters and has never been given sufficient reason to doubt it. "My lawyer's going to love this. Intimidation, harassment, armed men surrounding a family residence. By tomorrow morning, this is going to be the reason Samuel comes home." "Where's Karen?" Rhett asked. The smile froze. For the first time since Rhett had seen him, on the porch, in the parking lot, in the description of every room he'd ever corrupted, Dale Pittman's mask slipped. Not all the way, just a crack. A hairline fracture in the performance, so brief that a less observant man would have missed it. But Rhett didn't miss things in the dark. He hadn't missed them in the mountains. He didn't miss them now. "Karen's at home," Pittman said. "No, she's not. State police already checked. House is empty. Her phone's on the counter. Her car's in the driveway. She's gone, Dale, and you're the last person who saw her." The fracture widened. The smile collapsed by 2 degrees. The eyes, pale, flat, the color of river ice, shifted from calculation to something colder. Something that didn't bother pretending. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Where's Kaylee?" The name hit Pittman like a physical blow. His weight shifted. His right hand moved, not much, just a twitch toward his jacket pocket. The automatic reach of a man whose hands had solved problems before and whose body remembered the motion even when his mind knew better. "Where's Kaylee, Dale?" Your daughter, 7 years old, brown hair, ponytail. Last seen in October 2019. Where is she? You need to back up. 3 families, 3 children, 3 women who stopped talking after you got done with them. Where are they, Dale? Pittman's jaw clenched. The tendons in his neck surfaced like roots in eroded soil. His hands, both of them, closed into fists at his sides, and for the first time the size of him registered as something more than physical. It registered as history. The accumulated weight of every room he'd controlled, every voice he'd silenced, every door he'd closed behind himself. You don't have anything, Pittman said. His voice had dropped. The conversational register was gone, replaced by something lower, rawer, the subsonic frequency of a man who has stopped performing and started threatening. You've got a scared kid and a bunch of bikers and a file full of nothing. No charges, no evidence, no witnesses, just stories from people who weren't there. Karen was there. The words hung in the frozen air. Pittman stared at him. Behind Rhett, the dark was alive with men. Not moving, not speaking, just standing. A wall of scarred hands and leather and silence and the absolute, unshakable certainty that whatever happened in the next 60 seconds would define what this brotherhood meant and what it was willing to protect. Headlights appeared on County Road 9. Then more headlights. 3 sets. 4. State police. The cruisers turned onto the access drive in a convoy that filled the narrow road with red and blue light, pulsing, strobing, cutting through the dark in alternating flashes that lit the bare trees and the frozen gravel and the chrome of 8 motorcycles and the face of a man who, for the first time in his life, could not see the exit. Holt stepped out of the lead cruiser. Dale Pittman, she said. We found Karen. She's at the bus station in Decatur. She called us 20 minutes ago. She's ready to talk. She's ready to tell us everything. The smile, the last remnant of it, the final molecule of the mask, disappeared from Dale Pittman's face. And in the kitchen window of the porterhouse, lit by a single yellow bulb, an 11-year-old boy watched as the man who had taught him that home was something to fear stood alone in a driveway full of light, surrounded by the sound of engines and the presence of men who would not leave, and realized, slowly, silently, with the dawning comprehension of a child who has just witnessed something he has never seen before, that the door was not going to close. Not tonight, not ever again. Dale Pittman did not go quietly. When Holt told him to put his hands on the hood of the cab, he stood perfectly still for 4 seconds, long enough for every man on that property to feel the math running behind his eyes, the calculation of a cornered animal measuring the distance between where it stood and where it might escape to. His gaze swept the driveway. The cruisers, the motorcycles, the men. The dark beyond the tree line where the field stretched flat and frozen toward a horizon that offered nothing. Then he ran. Not toward the road, toward the back of the property, where the yard dissolved into scrub brush and a drainage ditch that fed into farmland. He moved fast for a man his size. Explosive, desperate, the lunge of someone who had spent his whole life controlling rooms and had never been in one he couldn't leave. He made it 30 feet. Colt Bishop came out of the tree line like something that had been waiting there since the earth cooled. He didn't tackle Pittman. He didn't swing. He simply stepped into the man's path with the calm, rooted certainty of a fence post, and when Pittman's momentum carried him into Colt's chest, the collision produced a sound like a car door slamming, heavy, final, absolute. Pittman hit the frozen ground. The air left his lungs in a grunt that sounded like it came from somewhere deeper than his body. He rolled once, tried to rise, and found Colt standing over him with one boot near his shoulder and a flashlight pointed at his face. "Stay down," Colt said. 2 words. The first ones anyone in the club could remember Colt saying at that volume. They carried the specific authority of a man who had once held a perimeter alone for 40 minutes while a medevac helicopter found a landing zone, and who had learned in that time that the voice matters less than the willingness behind it. Pittman stayed down. Holt arrived 10 seconds later with 2 troopers. They cuffed him on the frozen ground, hands behind his back, face in the dirt, the cold seeping through his clean shirt and into his skin. He said nothing. The smile was gone. The mask was gone. What remained was the face underneath, smaller than expected, older. the face of a man who had been performing for so long that without the performance, there was almost nothing left. They put him in the back of the cruiser. The door closed with a sound that echoed across the property and disappeared into the flat, frozen dark. Rhett watched the cruiser pull away. Its taillight shrank down the gravel drive, turned onto County Road 9, and merged into the distance until they were indistinguishable from stars. He stood at the end of the driveway with his hands at his sides and his breath rising in slow white clouds, and felt something drain out of him. Not relief, not triumph, something more structural. The scaffolding of tension that had been holding him upright for 72 hours collapsed joint by joint, and what remained was a man standing in the cold, suddenly aware of how tired he was. His knees ached, his back ached, his eyes burned from 2 nights without sleep. The cigarette he'd sworn he'd quit called to him from a pocket he'd emptied 3 days ago. Dex appeared beside him. They stood together in the dark, watching the empty road. "You good?" Dex asked. Rhett considered the question with the same deliberation he'd give a torque spec. "Not yet," he said. Dex nodded. Didn't push. Just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, the way they'd stood in 100 parking lots and a dozen rainstorms and 1 forward operating base, where standing next to someone was the only thing that kept the dark from swallowing you whole. Behind them, the porch door opened. Samuel came down the steps. He walked across the frozen yard in his socks. No shoes, no coat, just Grant's flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants that pooled around his ankles. The cold hit him immediately. His body contracted, his arms wrapped around himself. But he kept walking. Past the motorcycles. Past Boone, who reached toward him and then pulled his hand back because the boy was moving with a purpose that didn't need interruption. Past Trix, who stepped aside without being asked. Past Drake, who watched from the truck with eyes that carried the particular weight of a man seeing the reason his club existed made flesh. Samuel stopped next to Rhett. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't collapse. He stood there in his socks on the frozen gravel and looked at the empty road where the cruiser had been, and his breathing was the only sound in the silence. Fast at first, then slowing, then steadying into something that resembled rhythm. Rhett took off his jacket and put it around the boy's shoulders. Samuel looked up at him. "Is it over?" Rhett thought about the question, about what over meant to an 11-year-old who had never known a problem that stayed solved, about the hearing still pending and the investigation still running and the years of damage that no arrest would undo, about the fact that the word over implies an ending, and the things that had been done to this boy didn't end. They echoed, they reverberated, they lived in the architecture of his nervous system like cracks in a foundation that would need decades of careful work to stabilize. "The part where he gets to come near you," Rhett said, "that part's over." Samuel nodded, a small movement, precise. The acknowledgement of a fact by someone who had learned to accept partial answers because complete ones didn't exist. "Come inside," Grant called from the porch. "Both of you. There's coffee, and you're standing in the cold like fools." They went inside. The weeks that followed moved at the pace of institutions, slow, procedural, measured in paperwork and phone calls and the glacial grinding of systems that had failed and were now, belatedly, trying to correct. Dale Pittman was held without bail. The charge sheet grew. Felony intimidation of a minor, custodial interference. The Tulsa investigation reopened and produced what 8 years of silence had buried. Dina Pittman, living under her maiden name in a small town in Arkansas, came forward when she learned Dale was in custody. She spoke for 3 hours. The recording filled 47 pages of transcript. The details were the kind that live in the back of a courtroom like smoke. Present, pervasive, impossible to ignore even when you can't see the source. Kaylee was found. She was alive. Living with Dina under the new name, enrolled in school, seeing a counselor twice a week. 11 years old now, the same age as Samuel. She had nightmares. She didn't like closed doors. She drew pictures of houses with no windows and handed them to her therapist without explanation. When Avery told Rhett about Kaylee over the phone, there was a pause on the line that lasted 8 seconds. Neither of them filled it. Some facts require silence the way some wounds require air. You don't cover them. You don't rush them. You just stand there and let the reality of what happened and what almost happened occupy the space it needs. "She's alive," Avery said finally. Yeah, Rhett said. He didn't kill her. He just made her disappear, made her mother disappear, made the whole thing vanish like it never happened. Until it did happen again. Until it happened again. Christine Avila in Reno was located but declined to participate. Her attorney sent a statement confirming the divorce but providing no further detail. Whatever had happened in that house stayed sealed behind legal language and the specific silence of a woman who had already decided what she was willing to carry and what she was willing to release. Nobody blamed her. Nobody pushed. There were enough voices now. Karen Vance spent 2 weeks in a motel outside Decatur, paid for by a state victims fund, before entering a residential treatment program that Avery helped arrange. She called Samuel once, 4 days after the arrest. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. Grant Porter sat in the next room with the door open, not listening, not leaving, just present in the way that steady people are present when the ground is still shaking. Samuel hung up and sat on his bed for 20 minutes without moving. When Grant checked on him, the boy was holding the broken house key, the one he'd carried into the garage that November night, turning it over in his fingers the way he'd once turned the carburetor float, studying it with the focused attention of someone trying to understand how something so small could carry so much weight. She said she's sorry, Samuel told Grant. Grant sat on the edge of the bed, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to seem distant. How do you feel about that? He asked. Samuel looked at the key. I don't know yet. Grant nodded. That's an honest answer. Rhett says honest answers are the only ones worth giving. Rhett's a smart man. He's not smart. He just doesn't lie. Grant almost smiled. Almost. Winter released its grip slowly, the way winter does in central Illinois. Not all at once, but in grudging increments, each day surrendering a degree or two of cold as if the season resented having to leave. The ice on the puddles thinned. The frost retreated from the windows by mid-morning instead of clinging until noon. The bare trees showed the first impossible red buds at the tips of their branches, tight as fists, waiting. Samuel continued to come to the garage every Saturday. The shovelhead was finished now. Rhett had fired it for the first time on a Wednesday in late February, alone in the shop, with the bay doors closed and the sound filling the concrete space like a heartbeat restored to a body that had been still for 30 years. The engine ran rough for the first 2 minutes, coughing, stumbling, finding its rhythm the way a voice finds its range after years of silence. And then it settled. The idle smoothed. The exhaust note deepened into something that was not beautiful but was alive, which was better. When Samuel heard it that Saturday, he stopped in the bay door and stared. The bike sat on the floor, no longer on the lift, 2 wheels on concrete, chrome polished, tank painted flat black with a single pinstripe, silver, hand-laid, thin as a breath. The engine ticked with residual heat, the metal expanding and contracting as it cooled, producing a sound like tiny fingertips tapping on a door. You finished it, Samuel said. We finished it, Rhett said. About 40% of the work on that engine was done by an 11-year-old with a climber manual and better hands than mine. Samuel walked to the bike, put his hand on the tank, felt the warmth of the metal under his palm, the stored heat of combustion, of fuel and air and spark and timing, of all the precise mechanical relationships that had to be correct for the whole thing to work. Does it ride? Took it around the block last night, clutches stiff, brakes need bleeding, and the front end shakes above 50, which means the neck bearings are either dry or wrong, and we'll have to pull the triple tree to find out. Can I help? Rhett looked at the boy. 4 months ago, Samuel had walked into this garage soaked and silent, carrying a broken key and the accumulated damage of years of erasure. Now he stood with his hand on an engine he'd helped rebuild, asking to do more work, with an ease in his posture that hadn't been there before. Not relaxation exactly, not confidence exactly, but something in the neighborhood of both. The first draft of a version of himself that hadn't existed until someone gave him a wrench and told him his hands weren't broken. Wouldn't do it without you, Rhett said. They worked through the morning, pulled the front wheel, then the forks, then the triple tree. The neck bearings were dry, Rhett was right, and one of them had a flat spot that explained the shimmy. Samuel cleaned both races with solvent, while Rhett pressed in new bearings using a section of steel pipe and a dead-blow hammer, They packed the new bearings with grease, reassembled the front end, and torqued the stem nut to spec, while the coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen and Boone's radio played something old and slow from a speaker that had been wired to the ceiling with zip ties and optimism. Around noon, Dex came in with a bag of sandwiches and a six-pack of root beer. He set the bag on the bench, cracked a can, and leaned against the tool chest with the settled posture of a man who had finally gotten a full night's sleep. "Court date's set," Dex said. "April 18th. Prosecutors going for the full package, the Tulsa case, the intimidation charge, the trespass at the Porter property. Avery says they're also looking at Karen's testimony for additional charges related to neglect and coercion." Rhett nodded, but didn't look up from the fork assembly. "What about Monica?" Samuel asked. Dex glanced at the boy, then at Rhett. The question carried weight, not just curiosity, but the particular investment of a child who had discovered he had family he didn't know about and was still figuring out what that meant. "She's coming to visit," Rhett said. "Avery's arranging it. Supervised at the Porter's place. She wants to meet you." "She already met me. I talked to her on the phone last week." Talking on the phone and sitting in the same room are different things. Samuel considered this. Like how reading a shop manual is different from holding the parts. Rhett stopped working, looked at the boy. A slow smile, rare on his face, unfamiliar to the muscles required, moved across his expression like light crossing a wall. "Yeah," he said, "exactly like that." Monica came on a Sunday in March. She was small, shorter than Samuel expected, with dark hair and the Vance jawline that the boy would recognize in a mirror someday when he was old enough to look for it. She stood in the Porter's living room with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes moving across Samuel's face with the hungry attention of someone searching for traces of a person they'd lost. "You look like your dad," she said. Samuel didn't know what to do with that. He had no memory of his father, just a photograph on a shelf that his mother had packed away when Dale moved in and that he hadn't seen since. The idea that his face carried evidence of a man he couldn't remember was strange and heavy and not entirely unwelcome. "People say that," he said. "People are right." They sat at the kitchen table. Evelyn brought tea. Grant made himself scarce with the particular skill of a man who understood when a room needed fewer people in it. They talked for 2 hours, Monica filling in pieces of a history that Samuel had never been given. His father's name was James. He drove trucks, too, a different kind, local routes, home every night. He liked woodworking. He built a crib for Samuel out of walnut and spent 3 weeks sanding it because he couldn't stand the thought of a splinter near a baby's skin. Samuel listened the way he listened to everything, with total focus, cataloging details, filing them in the meticulous internal archive of a child who had learned that information was the only form of control available to him. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked. Monica's hands tightened around her teacup. "I tried. I called your mother. I wrote letters. I called CPS twice. I hired an investigator. But Dale, he's good at making people disappear, not just physically. He made me disappear from your life by convincing your mother I was dangerous, that I was unstable, that I wanted to take you away from her." "Did you?" "I wanted to take you somewhere safe. I didn't care what that looked like." Samuel processed this, nodded, looked at his tea. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. "I live in Dayton. That's 4 hours from here. But I'm going to come every month. And when you're old enough, if you want, we can talk about other arrangements. There's no rush. The Porters are good people." "I know. And the men at the garage, Rhett and the others, they're good people too." "I know that too." Monica smiled. It was a small, cautious smile. The smile of a woman who had been hoping for 3 years and had learned not to trust hope too quickly. "Your dad would have liked Rhett," she said. "Why?" "Because he fixed things. Your dad always trusted people who fix things." Spring came the way it does in places that have earned it. Not gentle, not gradual, but stubborn. Green pushing through frozen ground, buds cracking open despite the last frosts. The light lasting a few minutes longer each evening, as if the sun had finally decided the town was worth the effort. Samuel's 12th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. He arrived at the garage at 9, as always. Mountain bike, water bottle, notebook. But this time the bay doors were already open, And inside, under the fluorescent lights that had been wiped clean for the first time in a decade, the garage had been transformed. Boone had set up a folding table covered with a checkered cloth from the diner, borrowed, not bought, because Boone didn't buy things when borrowing involved a better story. On the table, a sheet cake with chocolate frosting, a cooler of root beer, a pile of paper plates, and a card signed by every patch holder in the chapter. The signatures were smudged with grease. Nobody had washed their hands first. Nobody needed to. Dex had strung a set of mechanics' drop lights across the ceiling beams. Not holiday lights, work lights, the heavy-duty kind with orange cords and metal cages, plugged into a power strip that hummed with the particular electrical complaint of a system being asked to do something it wasn't designed for. They cast the garage in a warm, uneven glow that softened the concrete and the steel and made the space look like something halfway between a workshop and a home. Trix had brought a portable speaker that was playing music at a volume that suggested he'd lost the argument about how loud was appropriate and was retaliating by choosing the songs. Colt had brought nothing. He stood in the corner with his arms crossed and his expression unchanged, which was his way of participating and which everyone understood without needing it explained. Grant and Evelyn Porter arrived at 10 with a card and a wrapped package. Avery came at 10:30 carrying a new notebook, leather-bound, unlined, with Samuel's initials embossed on the cover in small gold letters. Monica drove from Dayton. 4 hours. She brought a photograph, framed, black and white, of James Vance leaning against a truck with a cigarette behind his ear and a half-smile that Samuel stared at for a long time without speaking. Drake Vossler arrived last. He walked into the garage with the quiet authority of a man entering a room he'd built, looked around at the lights and the cake and the people and the boy standing in the middle of all of it, and he did something nobody expected. He laughed. Not a big laugh. Not a performance. A real one. Short, low, rough around the edges. The sound of a man who had spent 23 years building something out of broken parts and broken men, and had just seen the purpose of all of it standing in front of him in a flannel shirt and sneakers. "Happy birthday, kid," Drake said. Samuel cut the cake. He did it carefully, with the precision he applied to everything, measuring with his eyes, positioning the knife, making cuts that were straight and even and deliberately equal. He served the first piece to Boone because Boone had made him eggs that first morning without asking. The second to Dex because Dex had brought the sleeping bag. The third to Rhett. He held the plate out. Rhett took it. Their eyes met. And in that exchange, 2 seconds, no words, the plate passing from the small grease-stained hands of a 12-year-old to the larger, equally stained hands of a 44-year-old man who had carried things through mountains and deserts, and the long, cold nights of a life that had taken more from him than it had given. Something completed itself. Not fixed. Not healed. Completed. The way a circuit completes itself when the last connection is made and the current finally has somewhere to go. After the cake was eaten and the root beer was gone, and Trix had lost the speaker battle and the music was playing at a volume that everyone could tolerate, Rhett walked to the shovel head. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a wooden sign. It was small, about 8 inches by 12, cut from a piece of oak that Rhett had shaped on Grant Porter's table saw during a visit the week before. The edges were sanded smooth. The surface was flat and clean, and burned into the wood in letters that were slightly uneven because Rhett's hand with a wood-burning tool was steadier than most, but not as steady as his hand with a wrench, were 4 words. "This door stays open." He held it out. Samuel took it, read it again, ran his thumb across the burned letters, feeling the grooves, the texture, the physical evidence that someone had spent time making something that existed for no other purpose than to tell him he belonged. His chin trembled. His eyes filled. He didn't wipe them, didn't turn away, didn't perform the practiced disappearance that had kept him safe for years. He stood in the middle of a garage full of men who had once been strangers and were no longer, and he let the tears come, and for the first time in his life the crying was not a symptom of damage. It was the sound of something opening. Something that had been locked so long the hinges had rusted and the frame had swollen, and the key, the broken, useless, beautiful key, had never been the right tool for the job. The right tool had been a room full of people who stayed. Boone cleared his throat, looked at the ceiling. pretended to inspect the droplight wiring with an intensity that suggested the building's electrical system had become suddenly fascinating. Dex walked to the bay door and stood with his back to the room, watching the parking lot, his hand pressed against the metal frame in a grip that left marks. Colt didn't move, but his arms uncrossed, and his hands, hanging at his sides, opened, palms forward, fingers loose, in a gesture that was not taught in any training and was not part of any protocol, and meant, in the private language of men who protect things, "I'm here and I'm not leaving." Drake turned away and walked to his truck and sat in the cab for 3 minutes with the door closed. When he came back, his eyes were red. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody ever would. Samuel carried the sign to the workbench. His workbench, the one Rhett had cleared for him that first night, the one where they'd rebuilt the carburetor at 2 a.m, the one where the climber manual still sat with its dog-eared pages and its grease-stained cover. He hung the sign on the wall above the bench, used 2 nails and a hammer, measuring the placement by eye the way Rhett had taught him, not with a level, not with a tape, but with the intuition that comes from doing something enough times that your body knows when it's right. He stepped back. The sign hung slightly off-center. The letters were uneven. The wood had a grain pattern that made the S in stays, eyes, look darker than the other letters. It was imperfect and handmade and entirely, unmistakably real. Samuel looked at it for a long time. Then he turned around and looked at the room, at the men in their leather cuts and work boots, at Grant with his arm around Evelyn, at Avery with her cracked watch and her messenger bag, at Monica, who was crying quietly and not trying to hide it, at Rhett, who stood by the shovel head with his hands in his pockets and his face carrying an expression that was too complicated for a single word, pride and grief, and something ancient and unnameable. The look of a man who has spent his life building things that run and has finally built something that stays. "Thank you," Samuel said. Not to any one person, to the room, to the space, to the accumulated weight of every moment that had brought him from a locked door in the rain to an open one in the light. The garage held the words the way good spaces hold sound, letting them fill every corner, every gap, every crack in the concrete before releasing them slowly into the silence that followed. Outside, the afternoon was fading. The sky over Calvary Falls had gone the color of warm amber, and the light that came through the bay doors was long and gold and carried the particular quality of spring evenings in the Midwest, unhurried, as if the day had decided that ending wasn't something that needed to be rushed. One by one, the brothers left. Bikes starting in the parking lot, the rumble of engines building and then receding as each rider turned onto Depot Street and disappeared into the evening. The sound faded in stages, a chord resolving one note at a time, until only one bike remained. Rhett's. He stood in the bay door with his helmet in his hand. Samuel was at the workbench, tracing the letters on the sign with his finger, the way a person traces a sentence they want to memorize. The shovelhead sat between them, gleaming dully in the amber light, a machine rebuilt from ruin by 2 pairs of hands that had needed the work as much as the work had needed them. "Same time next week?" Samuel asked. Rhett pulled on his gloves, flexed his fingers inside the leather, looked at the boy, at the sign, at the garage that had become something none of them had planned. Not a clubhouse, not a shop, not a refuge, but all of those things pressed together until the boundaries disappeared and what remained was simply a place where people showed up. "Same time," Rhett said. He walked to the bike, threw a leg over, hit the starter. The shovelhead's engine caught on the first kick, a deep rolling thunder that filled the garage and rattled the windows and vibrated through the concrete floor into the earth beneath it. He let it idle for a moment, listening to the rhythm, checking the sound the way he checked everything, by feel, by instinct, by the accumulated knowledge of a man who understood that things work when they're cared for and fall apart when they're not. He pulled out of the garage and onto Depot Street. The town slid past him in the golden light, the shuttered hardware store, the pawn shop with its barred windows, the diner that closed at 6 but whose lights were still on because the owner was in there cleaning, alone, the way she always was. Calvary Falls. A town that had been failing for 20 years. A town that had forgotten how to hold its people until a few of its people decided to hold each other. The road opened up past the rail depot. Flat farmland stretched to the horizon in every direction. the winter-brown fields just beginning to show the first green of new growth pushing through. The wind was cool, but not cold. The sky was enormous. The engine beneath him ran steady and strong, the sound of it filling the space between the ground and the sky with the particular music of a machine that had been broken and rebuilt and was now, finally, doing what it was made to do. Behind him, in a garage at the end of a gravel service road, a 12-year-old boy sat at his workbench beneath a handmade sign and opened his notebook to a fresh page. He picked up a pencil. Held it the way Rhett had taught him to hold a wrench, firm but not tight, controlled but not rigid, with the understanding that the tool doesn't do the work. The hands do. And the hands are only as good as the intention behind them. He began to draw. Not an engine this time. A house, small, simple, a front door with no lock, a porch with a light on. And in the driveway, lined up like a row of promises, 8 motorcycles that meant someone was home. The pencil moved. The light faded. The garage settled into its evening quiet, heaters ticking, coffee maker cooling, the last warmth of the day draining slowly from the concrete. And on the wall, 4 words burned into oak held steady above the bench where a broken boy had learned to build. This door stays open.